I want to make sure that everyone knows Councilmember Jones had a conflict, and Mayor Pro Tem Schiff had a last-minute issue come up, but we are at a quorum. But Councilmember Jones called me earlier today, and Planning and Zoning, you know that she is your liaison off of council, but I want you to know that she believes there's a mic on back there. I think you're on, Dave. You may want to turn off. Councilmember Jones could not brag about you guys enough. She called me to tell me that Planning and Zoning is the very best board, and she doesn't care what the other council members say, that Planning and Zoning is absolutely the best board, that she's attended all the ones that she can, and she wanted you guys to know that when she's not there, she's watching it being streamed, and went out of her way to tell me you guys are prepared, you ask really good questions, you're respectful of each other, you have good conversations, and specifically, Ms. Moore could not say enough good things about you and your leadership. So I know all of the board, all of council feels that way, but I did want you to know Councilmember Jones wanted to say those things and is just sorry that she wasn't able to be here tonight. So with that, I call the city council portion of this to order. Yeah, and with these joint meetings, it's highly obnoxious, but the room's not really set up for this, so you have to just nearly eat the microphone or people are not going to see you. So I apologize in advance, and I know it's kind of awkward, but you're just going to have to do that. So we've thank you, Debbie Moore, for calling P&Z to order. I've called council to order. We have an ambitious work session ahead of us tonight. Item 2A is discussion and update on the draft subdivision ordinance. We all had a great plan to get together, and then Mother Nature had the ice storm. That's why we didn't have our first joint meeting. Council's had several of these joint meetings. We always walk away learning more, and it's a really great way. Planning and zoning is very often the first interface that folks have with Bastrop. Most of the time, if they're doing something in Bastrop, they see you guys before they see us. And so it's extremely important that we're all on the same page, that we understand what your issues are and things that we can do to support you, and that you understand what council's direction is. So I'm very appreciative of the time and effort that you guys put in. What we've done with all of the other joint meetings, you guys all know each other, most of us know each other, but it's very likely there are people at home that don't know everybody. So I'm going to start with Dr. Lawson and have each of you guys eat the microphone and practice speaking into the mic. Tell us your name, and either tell us how long you've been in Bastrop or how long you've been on P&Z, or just something besides just saying your name. Matt?
I am Matt Lassen.
Yeah.
I've been on P&Z for about a year, been in Bastrop for about 7 years. Previously served on the Board of Adjustments, and I was there for about 3 or 4 years prior to this, and I work and live in the downtown area.
Great.
Richard Gartman. I've been on the Planning and Zoning a little less than a year, and I've been here in Bastrop just a little over 2 years.
I am Cynthia Meyer, and I've been on Planning and Zoning for about a year now. And I own a business in downtown Bastrop. I have for almost 30 years, and I've lived in Bastrop a really long time.
No one's business, right?
Really
that is
long
no
time.
One's business.
How long? And I've really enjoyed being on the Planning and Zoning and learning and working with everyone, so it's been a great experience.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Lee, and I am new to not only Planning and Zoning, but any committee in Bastrop. I am from Bastrop, raised in Bastrop, and very excited to be part of the Planning and Zoning Committee.
I'm Sue Ann Fruchet. I've been in Bastrop for 10 years. I was on P&Z in Westlake, and spent 5 years trying to sell Cola Vista. So whatever that qualifies one for.
I'm Patrick Connell, and I've been on P&Z for a little less than 2 years, right around 2 years, something like that. I've been in the city limits for 3 years, and in the county for the last 10 or so, 9, 10.
My name is Debbie Moore, and I have been in Bastrop since late 2004. I've been involved in a lot of committees and festivals and events, and been on P&Z for about 4 years. And by the way, I couldn't agree with Councilwoman Jones any more than I do about this being the best board ever. And I'm always impressed with everybody. Great.
My name's Linda Apple. I'm the city manager, and I've been here since March of last year.
My name is Bill Ennis. I've lived in Bastrop for 26 years. I'm retired from service of 40 years with Texas Oil and Gas Association. I served as chair of the Historic Landmark Commission for 12 years, and I think it was 2 or 3 years as on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I am now about to start my 2nd year on City Council, place 4.
Hi, I'm Connie Schrader. I'm the mayor. I was elected on May 6th last year and sworn in on May 16th, along with Councilmember Ennis. I previously had been on Planning and Zoning for 7 years, and I started dating Bastrop in 1998, and I married it in 2003. Mr. Nelson?
I'm Lyle Nelson. I'm the newest member of the Bastrop City Council until Council Member-elect Rogers gets sworn in. I've lived here since 2009. I am also the liaison to what is arguably the best board, the Parks Board, but we will let that rest for now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Peterson. I'm Place 1 City Council. I'm into the middle of my 2nd term on the council. I served on the council once before, a few years back, and I'm a native Bastropian, and that says a lot, but I traveled around with the Bureau of Prison for 24 years and had to get back home to Bastrop. Thanks.
Thank you guys all so very much, and I was glad that, are we asking Drusilla to come sit? Thank you. Absolutely. I was glad that Councilmember Nelson mentioned, I was very happy to see Councilmember-elect Rogers here, and she'll get sworn in next Tuesday, and this way she can't say, but I didn't know, I wasn't at the meeting. So welcome. We're thrilled to have you. Okay, I think I had already read, we're here to talk about the update on the draft subdivision ordinance, and I think it's all up to you, Mr. Gaddis.
I think I'm on. It's still loud. I've been told to turn my back to the speaker, so avoid the feedback, so I'm not turning my back to you, Councilman Peterson. In fact, I may get back further. So, we've been talking about this thing for a while. We started really talking about updating the subdivision ordinance last September. Really got into it starting in October. Remember, we had several work sessions with both P&Z and council, kind of divided it up into thirds and took 1/3 at a time until we got to this January, and we were going to talk about that last third on our joint meeting that got iced out, and so things have been kind of discombobulated since then. In your package, you should have a copy of the complete ordinance. It's 150 pages long. It's about 50 pages longer than I would like to have an ordinance, but in order to get everything in, that's what it took. But you also have a 5-page summary of just the major changes. So you can kind of go down, look through what the significant changes are and kind of work from there if you'd like. Why are we updating the ordinance? Current ordinance dates back to 1999. It's almost 20 years old. And we've had a number of amendments over the years. And what's happened is the ordinance has gotten a little disjointed. It's duplicative in places. We've got 4 different design standards, and they kind of get repeated as you go through the ordinance. So what we're doing, and in its weekend, the requirements and policy and design. And remember that subdivision is a ministerial process. You can only require what's in the ordinance, and you can't turn down an application unless it doesn't comply with the ordinance. So you want to make sure that you have all the standards in there that you want, so that you have the flexibility to approve a good subdivision and not approve a bad subdivision. So what we've done is we reorganized the ordinance to make it flow a little better. So we start off with our general policies, then we go into the required dedications. Those are things like parkland dedication, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things, and you may ask, well, why do we make developers do that? You know, the theory is that new development is creating new demand on the system. And so as a result, they have an obligation to contribute to the expansion of that system in exchange for being able to sell lots and make money. So things like streets and water lines and sewer lines they have to build. We have a parkland dedication requirement. They need to contribute to the park system. And so there's a number of dedications that are spelled out. We have the definitions up front. The current ordinance, the definitions are way in the back, and they were a little brief. And so we have expanded the number of definitions to make sure that we've tried to cover everything that we need to cover. We also, in the old ordinance, there were some situations where people would put regulations into the definition. And what we've done is taken the regulation out of that, put it in the regulation section, and just definitions are exactly that, just a definition. We go through a description of the roles of the P&Z and the staff, who does what, who's responsible for what, just to lay out all the roles and responsibilities. And then a big part is the processing of plats, how we handle plats. And so state law gives some flexibility to cities on how they process plats. So we have 4 different ways of doing that. The standard process is for the big subdivisions, a lot of lots, a lot of streets and infrastructure being put in, and so we would typically require a preliminary plat be submitted and then a final plat. There are some plats that we don't need to go through all that process of a 2-step. We can go do what's called a short form plat. And instead of going to a preliminary plat, we go straight to a final plat. And that might be one where it's a small street and just a few lots. State law also gives you the opportunity to have staff approve plats, and so we have an administrative process for small plats that are only 2 or 3 lots and no new streets or infrastructure is being dedicated, and so that just gets done by staff, and it's just a way to streamline things. What we are changing here, and we'll get into it in a second, is we are delegating the authority of plat approval to the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's one thing that state law allows. It's a ministerial process, so as long as you meet all the requirements, you really don't have a lot of discretion about whether you approve it or not approve it, so just delegate that to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that saves at least a month off the processing time for a developer because they don't have to go to council and have 2 readings to get approved. We're also adding what's called a sketch plat review, and that's just a preliminary kind of back of the napkin type sketch of what the project's going to be, and then it's a little bit more than the back of the napkin, but that allows us to kind of classify what kind of plat it is, locate exactly where it is, what rules apply in that particular place. Form and content of plats, that's where we specify that it has to be drawn at a 18 by 24 or 24 by 36 inch size paper so that they don't come in with some odd size that the county won't allow to be filed. We require that it be ink on Mylar, that it be drawn to a certain scale, and then have all of the required information on there, including some of the legal requirements of how streets and easements get dedicated to the city. That's the part where the development actually gives those things to the city. Then we have a fairly long section on design standards in terms of how we design streets, how we design water lines, sewer lines, etc. And then in your current ordinance, if you open up the section on subdivisions, the first thing you see is impact fees. And you have to go in about 20 pages before you get to the subdivision ordinance. We're taking the impact fee section and moving it to the back. So when you open up the subdivision section, you start with subdivisions, and then when you get to the end, then you get to impact fees. So some of the significant changes in platting. One is that we have strengthened the requirement to plat. It's in the city's best interest to have everything platted. That's because we get the property records squared away. When you do a plat, we double check to make sure all the lot descriptions are done, and it makes it easier to describe a piece of property instead of having to do a meets and bounds description of somebody's lot you can just say, well, lot 1, block 3 of the Glen Avon addition, and a surveyor could lay out all the boundaries of that. Planning is also the time when the city gets all the necessary rights-of-ways and easements and infrastructure necessary to support that development. And so we want to make sure that, all the easements necessary to serve the property are there, the right-of-way is the proper width, etc. And we have a general requirement in the ordinance that in order to get a building permit, your property needs to be properly platted. That's our biggest trigger to make sure that property doesn't get split up. They go build something on it, and then we find out that it wasn't properly subdivided. So withholding building permits is the main hammer that we have. Obviously we can go after the fact and do fines and litigation, but it's a lot cleaner just to withhold building permits up front. But for, since 1832, people have been building on lots in Bastrop without benefit of plat. And so there is a provision in your current ordinance that allows for building on a lot as long as it is what's called a lot of record. And a lot of record is a lot that was in its current configuration prior to the city adopting its first subdivision in the early 80s. So if your lot matches what's now with what was then we can go ahead and assume that that's essentially a platted lot, but we call that a lot of record. If the lot has changed over the years, that means that they didn't come in and do the subdivision like they should have since we adopted that subdivision ordinance back in 81. So we want to make sure that it gets properly platted at that time. But we need to establish some triggers about when we require platting and when we don't for lots of record. And so what we've done is we will allow somebody to expand their existing structure up to 120 square feet, so you could add on a room or a shed or a garage, and we're not going to require platting for things as simple as fences or signs or flat work.
Mayor and Council, before Dave moves on, as we transition from our previous codes and not getting permits and not doing plats, we're kind of in a tough situation because we're changing behavior. And one of the real issues in the community with folks is they don't want to plat. So this is one of those things that I'm going to say to you, staff thinks needs to be done, but you're going to get a lot of pushback. And so if there are any questions of Dave that you want to ask, visit with the Planning and Zoning Commission. This is one, even though it doesn't seem like a big deal, causes us a lot of stress during the day.
So this is when people come to build a room, do something, and they get told the wonderful words, "You do not have a legal lot."
Correct.
And that's not something somebody wants to hear when they're paying a mortgage on a home and they think they've done everything right and they have clear title, and now you're telling me I don't have a legal lot. I would be upset if someone made that comment to me as well. So the other part of that is for folks that live in Hunter's Crossing, they're not going to have this problem. Riverside Grove's not going to have this problem. This is historic downtown. Mr. Peterson's family's had that property for way before 1981, and you've now just told him he doesn't have a legal lot. So is there a second page to the exemptions from platting, or that's it?
That's it in a summary, but that's pretty much it. But let me respond to that.
Okay.
If you've had your lot for generations and it hasn't changed, then you have a legal lot of record. All we need to do is to show the deeds that the lot boundaries have not changed since 1981.
So the problem is when I've had a child and I've let the kids build a house and we've agreed that this is going to be the new lot line.
And so you have subdivided without benefit of a plat.
So if that situation happened to exist and my kids wanted to add a room to the house and they would come down and find out, oh wait, you've subdivided without the benefit of the plat, and I'm asking for a building permit to add a room to my house, how much money and how much time are you now going to ask for in addition because I don't have a legal lot?
We would require that you do a minor administrative plat, so you would have to hire a surveyor to plat that out, and then you'd have to do the application fee. In most cases, those don't have to go to P&Z, those are approved in-house.
Okay, and so do we have, and I know this is a totally unfair question because it depends on how big the lot is and how hard it is to find the pins, and I know all of that. Around about, what kind of money are we talking about? Because this is what makes my phone ring. That's why I'm asking. Yes.
So my experience would say that's probably about an $800 cost. About 800. Have a surveyor come out, survey a whole piece, split it up, and get a usable version would probably be about $800.
So we're saying that in general, and I know it's what ifs. I think I'm going to add a room to my house. You've told me administratively, if there's not a dispute, if it's easily surveyed, it's $800. They've produced a drawing that says here's your lots, and you ought to be able to get it approved, but you have to have paid the surveyor to produce that new plat.
So we spent a lot of time on this one because the original version, there was no exceptions at all. So if you were going to get an electrical permit to do something, you'd have to replat it. And we spent a lot of time talking about those that are already here and existing, and how that might be unfair and undue burden. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the balance between having everything platted, because as we go forward and as we start to develop everything north of the tracks and inside all the land that we still have available, we need it platted going forward, just like we need our utilities all platted and everything else. So we felt, I think, everybody can give their feedback that, if you're doing less than 120 square feet change, you're doing fences or signs or flat work or something like that, that's fine. But if you're going to do another structure, or you're going to have a large addition or something like that, that would be kind of where the line is. And we had to pick one, and I guess we thought that was kind of best, unless somebody else has an. For just my own personal edification, was that an exception? Were you guys a split vote, or was that a unanimous vote? I think it was unanimous that we all agreed that there should be there's got to be a limit. And we agreed that after they did some research that this was a good limit for that.
Flat work is flat site, so maybe they're going to add a driveway, add a patio, add a sidewalk.
One thing I did want to clarify, David, you mentioned earlier if they wanted to, when we talked about changing the building footprint, you used the term like garage or something like that. If it's a separate structure, that would no matter how big it is, that would require it, right? Because that's not changing. You're not changing the building footprint at that point.
My recollection though is the 120 foot would apply to sheds as well.
Okay.
But that's not a big shed either. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Hats off, because that's exactly what I think we've asked you guys to do. It can't be, no, we're just going to have illegal lots and have no idea of what we have. That's not a good solution. And if you want to do absolutely anything, now you got to go spend a bunch of this. My personal opinion is you guys have done a great job of that's a reasonable thing. If it's more than 120, if you're building a second floor on the house, if you're adding a major structure, we need to know where the utilities are and where the easements are. And so I think you guys have done a great job.
We also requested that the definition of legal, how do we phrase it?
There's a definition for a legal lot.
There wasn't, but now somebody can reference it and go, well, what the heck? They said that I don't have a legal lot. They can go find the definition of what a legal, is it illegal or legal?
I think we ended up with just legal lot of record.
Legal, so they can tell the difference, so that, your point, like, I have a.
And I hope we also have a definition for a lot of record.
Yes.
Okay. Council, I've done a lot of talking. I'm very your phones will ring as well. Do you have any comments? Are you comfortable with this?
So let me give you another example. In my neighborhood, I'm aware of a property owner who has bought a strip of land, and it's never been included in their property. Mm-hmm. So if they wanted to add something, they would need to come in and get that resurveyed, and that would be establishing another plat.
But to complicate issues, if within their original lot, which may be a lot of record, if they kept their building within the setbacks on that lot, they could build, and if that was the extra strip of land was used for nothing more than just a yard, we probably would never get involved. If their new structure would encroach on those setbacks or cross that line, it would have to be platted. But it's the sale of strips of land that have happened for the last 30 years that are the problem. Remember, we've had a subdivision ordinance since 1981. So if somebody has changed their lot since then, they have been in violation of the subdivision ordinance.
Okay.
I think, Madam Mayor, just a couple thoughts on what's gone over is, I mean, I think if, you pay a surveyor $1,000, they'll come out and do it. I think the city's going to request somewhere around $600 for filing fees and recording fees. And I think by the time you're said and done with the plotting process, you're pushing up to about $2,000 to have the whole thing done. A few issues as far as timeline go, most surveyors are going to take a while. I know our local surveyors, there's 2 of them. They're on, I think, a 4 or 5 month wait because of these ordinances. Their business is good for them, let's just say, and they can't get to stuff. And I know that currently staff is still having people sign a 30-day waiver of their state right to a 30-day review on plats. And I know that in the current subdivision, the ordinance that they've made an attempt to really lay out the timeline. But that's also another concern with the number of plats that are going to be coming through the city is just the time that city staff have available to process these plats. Having been through the process several times myself, I look at the timelines that are on there and they seem very ambitious, and without added resources, I failed to see a lot of how the staff are going to get through to these things. And another concern is I think everyone understands big developers coming in, splitting up land. I think even people understand I'm going to give half of my land to my kids. You're breaking a new lot, and you may be giving it to your kids, but at the same time, you could be selling it and making money out of this. I think, the ultimate concern in my mind when it comes to these fees, these soft costs that kind of increase the cost of housing here in Bastrop, are, Widow Jones that's lived on her land for, her family for the last 150 years that, doesn't have excess money. And at one point she's going to get to the point where she can either afford to redo something, or she's going to sell her land to someone who can't afford to do it and go live in an apartment. And, I just think that, that's a part of our culture and heritage here in this town. And, there's kind of the nasty word gentrification, and it's not just the platting process that causes that. I mean, the cost of housing just goes up. Construction costs go up, materials go up. I mean, this isn't by any means the sole solution, but those are, I think with a lot of our ideas coming into this, those were the main concerns. Is that, Bastrop existed prior to what we're doing here today, since 1830. And people come to town because they like the old town. They don't come here to go to our subdivisions that are beautifully platted, on the outskirts. They like the downtown, they like the historic area. And I think that deserves consideration. I don't even know if we could build our downtown the way it is now with our current platting and building standards. What everyone comes to see, we couldn't rebuild unless we got an exemption, in some case. And I think that that's where a lot of these ideas, at least that's kind of kept me up, is thinking of these people and thinking of the downtown and how do we preserve the downtown without creating, too many costs with it, because that's what keeps our city alive. Is the charm of the downtown, and so for sure it's a complicated issue, and I for one like the way the 1981 ordinance was written in the last code, where we just let it go. I can totally understand if you demolish your house, that kind of indicates you're starting over and you've got the money to start over, but at the same time I just want to make sure we're not putting pressures on people to move out of the town that have lived here for a long time.
So Matt, are you comfortable with this the way it is, or not really?
Like I said, it's definitely better than it was originally. We've gone through it a bit and kind of brought it to where it was, but I don't quite understand the 120 square foot. I mean, I totally get major reconstruction and stuff like that, but I know that we want to kind of get things more neat and orderly, but Bastrop's existed for, since 1830, and I get there might be minor issues with some of these lots downtown, but the city's still here. Nothing's blown up, made a huge issue, and I do feel that, especially with this ordinance, the city's kind of sticking its nose where it really doesn't have. I know they want to have a say in it, and technically they do because they provide the services in the area, but it seems intrusive to me. Yeah. But it definitely is in a more acceptable form now.
And I think that's kind of what we were going for is it as reasonable as it can be? Because the flip side of that, I mean, it's easy to come up with I've lived here forever, all I'm trying to do is add a room. Why is it the city's business? I don't need to, I'm still getting my mail, I don't need another water service and that. Then the problem happens when it's gone over a lot line that's not really a lot line because it wasn't platted, and now there's a neighbor next door that's mad. That's when it becomes a huge deal, and people look to the city to have protected them from
Absolutely.
the nasty neighbor that put up a fence on their property that everybody knew their grandmother said they could have their chicken coop, and it gets complicated. But I do want to speak to, and Councilmember Ennis may want to as well, keeps me up at night that the lovely downtown charm, the big house by the little house by the big house that we have in our downtown, you cannot build according to our current subdivision. It is my understanding it's our goal to get there. So this is a step. That's going to be a big step, but it's not one that we're backing off of. That's immediately in the work plan. And we all, Councilmember Ennis and I know that we'll talk about this at our council retreat, but I just don't want you to think that you're alone in regretting the fact that you can regulate yourself, that you've regulated yourself out of the very charm of the city that we're trying to preserve. The city manager may want to make a comment.
Yes, ma'am. We actually met with a consultant today that I asked for a quote to solve that. And essentially, and I love the way he frames it, I'm going to come in and map the DNA of downtown. I mean, that's brilliant. That's exactly what we want. The awesomeness of it is in my past, I've worked in cities that wanted what Bastrop had, but we couldn't figure out how to do it. And so I would have to put my council on a bus, and we drove from Dallas to Plum Creek and Kyle. I don't have to put anybody on a bus. We just get to go downtown. So the consultant's really excited about that because not only is that important and historical, but it's financially sustainable. Suburban sprawl doesn't pay for itself. And so part of the challenge as citizens that you've said to all of us is that you want great service, but you don't want your taxes to go up. So what that means is that we need to invest in infrastructure that ultimately pays for itself, not that we continue to subsidize. So to the mayor's point, we've started that today, recognizing that we're very proud of historical downtown, and anybody that I know that's ever come here is just falling all over themselves wishing they had that. So it's the very thing we ought to protect, and it's the very thing we can't build. So we're working on that. I do want to put another piece to what the doctor indicated relative to fees. That is set by a policy that has nothing to do with planning and zoning, and that is your financial policy that says that we have to cover the cost of service. So part of the challenge that we have right now is we all know that we've got some capacity challenges in our planning and zoning department. If you come in my office, I have a whiteboard, and it's epic because not only do we have some bandwidth challenges, we've made every process as manual as we can make it, and all of our codes are 20 plus years old. And the development's now here. We had 4 huge developments show up last week and literally fall out of the sky. So I've gone from it's a problem to I'm panicked. I mean, we're in the sense of urgency. So I'm going to be visiting with council in the next week and talk to you about some of the operational challenges that we are addressing in-house, and we're reallocating resources and strengths to overcome that. And my hope is that the time frames that we think are optimistic today, we can beat, because our goal is by the end of September 30th, we have to get realistic, because it's painful, because every time we encounter somebody, the mayor's phone's lit up or mine's lit up because it's not working well. So it's the brick wall I hit every day, just like this. So we've got a lot of bandwidth internally to have a much better process by September 30th. Because we just don't have a choice. And then the goal is that we do some of the creative things this next year. It's even more streamlined because time is money. It's money for you as a property owner. Time is money for anybody that wants to come to town. And we need to be respectful of the process and recoup our costs. We don't need to be the obstacle in the way. And so that's kind of a lot of conversation to put into perspective that we are part of the problem. We are operationally working at part of the problem. But from a fee perspective, if that's something that when you get to this point you want to address, we're going to have to amend your financial policy because our fees are set based on our cost of service. But as we streamline them and we get more efficient, in the words of Mayor Pro Tem Gary Schiff, perhaps the fees will be reevaluated and may not be what they are today because we'll be more automated and more efficient.
And it may be for this meeting or another one, but I'd like us to put on the parking lot, maybe one of the things we talk about, I know there's county taxes over 65. Maybe we do something for folks at an age, or if they've lived in town after a period of time, that there's a different fee schedule for them to try to protect some of that very thing. We ought to at least have the conversation.
I just want to say real quick, from a practical application standpoint, if you are putting a addition on your home, most people don't have the cash to do that. So you're going to have to get a loan to do that, home equity line or something like that, home improvement, and that lender is going to require you to have a new survey anyway, showing where it's going to be at, what it's going to look like. So if you have the cost to do it and pay cash for it, the fees may not be such a big deal. If you're going to get a loan to do it, you're still going to have to do the survey and whatnot anyway.
Well, absolutely,
as part of that process. So I just mentioned that as a practical. But they're going to charge you separately for a survey and for a plat. They're two fee structures with most surveyors, and they're going to, sure, if they've surveyed it, they have the information for a plat, but it doesn't stop them from having a little bit more cushion there for their profits at that point. I'm just saying that a surveyor coming out and drawing the property and getting the lay of it, and what you're going to do is going to require somebody's going to loan you money to do an improvement like this anyway. So that may not be such maybe more, but not more than they would get anyway.
Dave, I think it would help, I think, certainly in my mind, and probably folks that may be watching, what constitutes a properly platted property? I mean, is it just surveyed and registered at the county, or what makes it that?
A properly platted lot is one that has been subdivided in accordance with the rules of the city of Bastrop and approved by the city of Bastrop and then filed at the county courthouse. We don't want people to think, well, they can just draw up a drawing and then file it at the courthouse, because they'll try to do that. But it has to be in accordance with your regulations and then filed at the courthouse.
Well, I'm thinking of my own instance. I bought my house that was built in 1916 that had the same survey for all those years.
Right.
And
so you would have a legal lot of record, because your lot is in the same configuration as it was in 1981 when we adopted the subdivision ordinance.
But there's another twist to it, which might change this. The survey that I bought it under was incorrectly drawn. So I had to have a deed correction with the proper meets and bounds on it after I had it resurveyed. What happens there?
Was the
10
error,
years ago?
Was the error
15.
in the surveying, or did you actually move a lot line?
No, it was an error in the survey.
Well, then we would treat that as the same boundaries.
It's still a legal lot of record.
That's
well,
correct.
how do you get from a legal lot of record then, where you've had everything surveyed, to a properly platted property?
So if somebody had a legal lot of record and was going to build a new large building, or they wanted to encroach, they wanted to buy the lot next door and combine the two, then you would go through the platting process. And you would have a surveyor draw up the plat, submit it to the city, and then we approve it, and then the mayor signs it.
And I sign lots of them. So let me ask Councilmember Ennis' question a different way. I'm at home, I'm watching this. How do I know if I have a legal lot or not?
You may not know until you come to the city, and then we require that you provide a copy of the deeds going back to prior to 1981 so that we can check to see whether the lot lines have changed at all.
So quite frankly, that's part of what makes my phone go crazy. And I know there's a bandwidth issue, but that puts a lot of onus on a property owner, which may or may not have any knowledge of deeds, plats, how to find it in the county records, any of that kind of stuff. So they come in, you guys say, I need your deed of record back
Right.
to whatever year. They may or may not know what you're talking about. They may or may not have what you're talking about. And so then my phone starts ringing. It's just tough? We're in a tough situation? Is there a potential that we'll eventually have things online to where we can look things up? Or help me out here.
It'd be nice if the county clerk had things online, but it's not like we've never said tough luck. You know, we try to help people out, explain how to get it done. But if you're asking us to begin into the abstracting service, that's a big effort as it is.
Well, so Councilmember Ennis, I mean, so if you were to go and add on something to your property under this code greater than 120 square feet, yeah, you'd be required to replat your property by these standards. And correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, plats do serve a great purpose.
I don't think you'd have to change it because you're not changing the configurations. It's
Greater,
already a legal
greater
lot.
than 120 square feet, which invokes the first thing, 120 square feet or less in new building footprint.
If he's adding onto his house more than 120 square feet, yes, that would trigger the platting.
Even if the lot's already legal, though.
Yes.
Yeah,
If it's a platted lot, but if it's a legal lot of record, it would require the platting.
So then I'd have to go and have a survey, have it surveyed again, and pay all these fees to do this, just to add on to my property.
Correct.
Even though it's been surveyed through the years many times and the county has it.
Well, I think that as much as I'm kind of obviously against the plats in the downtown area, the plat serves a great purpose. You know, and when you're looking at a new subdivision, you know, if the city's going to take control of these streets that are going to be dedicated, they're committing to provide a service to this lot, whether that's electrical, water, and the city has a right to be able to say, yes, we can provide this service, or no, we can't. You need to upgrade X, Y, and Z so that we can do this. Because the plat seems to me it's kind of a contractual agreement almost between you and the city that says, I can build on this lot if I follow these rules, and you will provide me with X, Y, and Z services. And so it makes total sense in a new development. The downtown, it becomes harder because you've already had all those services, and this kind of make a bookkeeping kind of thing. And I know that it makes things feel better when everything lines up on the computer screen and it's easy to look at it when we don't know where half of our services are in Bastrop as far as electrical and water underground. But yeah, I mean, it serves a good purpose when you're developing a piece of land. Absolutely. I mean, it's you know, that's the way we do it today. I mean, it makes sense that, you know, as far as the whole code goes, the code that's been written by staff is fantastic. I mean, I think it applies to commercial development in the sense that not necessarily whether you're going to put shops there or houses there, but commercial residential. But if you're looking to make money off of the city, it does a great job controlling people, you know, the way it's currently written. And it just seems to be this area with the old town where you don't see a need for this plat either, you know, as you've been there forever. But, you know, that's kind of the thing, is that it does help things be easier for the city, you know.
I will agree and say a yes, but he's exactly right. We don't know where our infrastructure is, and platting helps with that. We've been working on a piece of property downtown that a buyer and a seller have an interest in carving out a piece, and the property has been there so long that we don't know where the infrastructure is, and they don't either. And so now you're going to carve out a piece of property, and I'm sure everybody expects to be able to build on it and have water and sewer and access to water and sewer without having to spend thousands of dollars to it. So the way you do that is you build an easement and you market shared so that the property owners can then share the stuff. And if we don't do that, then you're left buying a piece of property that you can't live on without spending way more than $1,000 to get. So for every situation you can prove platting doesn't work, we could come up with a situation where platting would solve a whole lot of problems. And so this really is a situation where you have to determine your threshold for paying, honestly. And so an answer would be is that you carve out what part of downtown you just don't want to mess with, and we plat everything else. But the flip side of that is that people will come in and will eventually buy, and they will come from somewhere other than Bastrop where platting has been a standard, and they'll make the assumption that things are there when they're not. And so that's the unintended consequence that will also make the mayor's phone light up. So the reason I said please debate this is for the conversation we're having. You're not going to make everybody happy. And it's just which group are there fewest of that you're likely to irritate, honestly. Because we deal with the pros of it, where if it was council member Ennis and he wasn't doing anything, we could all nod and go, yep, there's nothing to that. But we've had a really confusing piece of property that is why we're really interested in platting, is to separate all of it. It has been challenging, I think would be a nice adjective to put on it. And we're now on our third meeting about that to try to get it all in a box. So there's no easy solution. So this would be one that I would just ask you to noodle, to really make peace with, because whatever y'all adopt, we're going to enforce. And staff ends up being the bad guy because we've made people do something. I don't vote. My staff doesn't vote. We just enforce whatever it is you approve. That's our job. So whatever we do, I will tell you, we're going to do a much better job as we move forward about educating our customer on the why we do something and the how we do something. And so we talked today about the code revisions that we need to do. And my comment to staff and the consultant was, I don't really care how it gets adopted, but we need to give you a brochure that's in citizen speak. That's all the things you need to do your project in a way you will process and understand without complicating it with city speak. So this is an area, whatever you do, we're going to work at making it easy for you to understand all of the steps in the process. Because and I love this, for Patrick, who's done this a lot, it's no big deal, and here's what you do. For people that have never done it, didn't know they need to do it, it's $800 we didn't have budgeted. It's $800, oh my God, and I need the room, my mother's coming, or whatever the case may be. So please really noodle this, and before we adopt this, let's make peace with, and if it's carving it out because we don't want to mess with it, that's fine. If it's 120 and that's too small and we want something bigger, that's great, because your phone's going to ring regardless of what you do. I'm making a note to say you're not going to solve this problem.
There's another part to this that I want to say in Old Town. I've lived in my house nearly 30 years. There are people like Bill Peterson's family and Cynthia's families that have lived in their houses for a lot longer than that. And I'm probably missing what it is the city doesn't have to make my lot properly platted. Because I've had it surveyed over and over again, and on several different occasions, and I've had it turned into the county. So what is it that makes it not platted? But let's set that aside for a minute. The problem is we got a whole bunch of people in town that have lived there nearly all their life, and we come in and tell them that they are illegal and they've not been living on a properly platted land. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up that I'm not properly platted.
I want to make clarification why I put this definition there. Not having a legal lot only means that the city doesn't consider it legal as far as like developing it. You still hold title to that. It's likely has a title policy on it if you bought it with a lender. So it's a legal piece of property that you own. It's got a tax ID number, you pay tax on it. The determination of whether it's legal or illegal is only referenced to the city and only for development. It doesn't affect your ownership of the property.
I understand that, but that doesn't soften the blow to these people out there that we're going to tell, I'm sorry, folks, you got to come up with all this stuff because we don't have the right records. Why don't we have the right records?
There's also a community caretaking aspect to this, and my view of this is that if you build something and you're within the setback or you're over a lot line that you didn't know existed, you can control your property, but you cannot control your neighbors. And so as properties trade hands, as we grow, if your neighbor moves in, they get a survey and realize that your garage is over their lot line or something's messed up, that person could then sue that person and force the hand. And I think the city has a community caretaking, as we go forward to make sure that we're not putting residents in situations where that could happen.
I understand the need. I'm not arguing with the need. I'm arguing with as Linda says, the perception problem we're going to have from a truckload of people who go, wait a minute, and I don't understand it yet either. There's a gap there of why are we considering the lot not up to however you want to call it, legal, illegal, not standard, whatever. Why is it that we are not as a city, are not considering that way when everybody else in the world does? The lenders, the tax guy, the county, everybody else considers it so.
Councilmember Ennis, it's not that we are gonna; we already have. Your phone may not be ringing, but these people everybody on P&Z has heard about it. I guarantee you the planning department has heard about it. My phone has rung about it, and it's the exact same thing. And some of the conversations were, so we can give you service. Give me service. I've been paying my water bill for 50 years, everything about that. There's not a right answer. That's the bottom line. I think you guys have wrestled with this. Matt, I think you voted for it, but you still have some concerns over it is kind of where I see you. But for where we are right now, I don't think we should say, if you're going to carve anything out, you're carving out the very place that we know that we need it. So I don't think that is a good solution. I also don't think we want to be in, Councilmember Ennis doesn't have to do it, and Councilmember Peterson doesn't have to do it, but Cheryl, welcome to town. I think it's extremely important that we be very consistent. I think the planning department only has a chance if we're very consistent. So if 120 is too small and you want, I think you guys wrestled with that, and it's not an arbitrary number, and I think you guys set that number, and if I'm wrong, speak up. But if we are going to talk, this is the group of people that need to have that conversation, because I think there are consequences to this, because I know there already have been consequences to this.
Well, I think that 120 was a suggested number to us. I mean, I don't think anyone really felt like they had the expertise to really know what that threshold was.
We sent it back to staff and they came back with.
Staff came with the number.
It's kind of a room, right? It's essentially a standard.
I think it represents the idea that something can be done without necessarily triggering this replat. And that definitely, I think, is the correct idea. But like you said, I don't think we came up with 120 as any magic number. It was just kind of suggested. But I think the idea is true. But yeah, that number, I don't know that we have a whole lot of weight invested in or time invested in that number other than just
we're on the
right track.
And I may regret asking this, but if somebody came in and they were building 180 square feet, can they ask for a variance and not have to plat? Or is that's the rule? And
actually, the new ordinance has a provision for the P&Z to grant waivers and exceptions to requirements for the ordinance.
If you don't mind, I just have a few questions. And first, let me thank you for letting me sit up here with you. A few questions with your fee and maybe a suggestion. If, for one thing, the city wants everybody to be platted, is that not correct? So that's a benefit for the city if everyone did plat. So if you were going to, let's say Bill Ennis needed to plat his land, and I understand the fee needs to be great. You've got these big developers coming in, they're paying their big fees, but we're wanting him to give us something. So if to me, if you're wanting something from somebody, maybe you should offer them, hey, you've already owned the land, you've already surveyed it, blah, 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 for that particular situation. And I understand that's a fee that's not in this board, I mean, not in this meeting, but maybe they get a break for that fee because they're actually giving the city something the city wants. So why don't we make it a benefit for them to do what we want them to do instead of punishing them for doing something we want them
So
to
if
do?
it's going from a lot of record to a platted lot, you waive the platting fee, and they
Right,
have to
because
pay
they're
for the
giving-
surveying. To
right.
your point, you may have to be
They
paying
might
for it
be-
anyway, but you waive the platting fee and we get the plat.
Right, because then we have a plat. And my other question is, and, you know, I don't think I sell a lot of houses or buy a lot of houses, but if, let's say I was buying Bill Ennis's house and I was a new buyer coming in, is it required for it to be platted in that whole buying situation? Or can I buy a historical lot that's not platted?
If you have an existing survey and a T-47 affidavit, which is a Department of Insurance form that the title company needs, that will change.
That can change.
That's the illegal side is only city speak for whether we're going to let you develop it or not. So,
I understand that.
but when you buy it, it doesn't. You inherit.
It's not part of the title check.
Yeah,
that's what
the
I'm
title
trying to
company
figure out.
doesn't care.
So a new person coming to town doesn't even realize that they're buying something that's not platted.
That's correct.
And I'm just wondering if that's something that we can solve, since there's not a big area of town that, I'm compared to the
As
whole
somebody
city
who's
limits.
done it several times, I myself will go and bang my head against the wall at the county clerk's office, pulling paper records from the last 40 years. It is not feasible unless you want to pay to devote thousands and thousands and thousands of man hours to have a record of what's legal and what's not until somebody comes in and requests it. And then we'd still have to, it's either the city bears the cost of sending somebody over there to do it, or they
Well,
bear the cost.
my question was is each time someone buys a house,
They wouldn't know about that.
they would know? Or
They
wouldn't?
would not.
I'm just
There's no
wondering if that's
trigger for
something
that.
we can catch as a new owner buyer.
That's what he's saying. The only way you catch it is somebody who either has tons of time on their hand and the knowledge goes and digs through county records, or you pay somebody to dig through
So
county
the title
records.
company wouldn't know whether
They're not going to know.
You'd have to flag every property in the city with something that would pop up a title check to make them redo it, which would be totally.
And then people will say, how come my title policy is now 20 bazillion times higher than it was? Well, because we don't know how many county records we're going to dig through. I'm not trying to be ugly, but I promise if it was easy to fix, he would have fixed it. That's what the problem is.
I'd like to say that thank you for all the work. I don't want to sound argumentative. I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of somebody that would have to jump through that hoop. And thank goodness I have the resources to be able to do this if I need to do it. But like either Connie or Linda said a while ago, there are going to be quite a few people who don't have the resources to do it.
Well, and it is a hoop to jump through, Bill, and just to kind of say that, I mean, I've jumped through it both on, hey, I'm going to try and make money off of Bastrop, and I'm just trying to live in Bastrop. I've done it twice, and I'll say when you're developing a piece of property for commercial use, it's not a big deal. It's just, it's part of what it is. You come in, you do it, it doesn't make any difference, it's just part of the requirements. But, as everyone's been talking, it's going to hit the citizens, because, yeah, I mean, sure, you tell me I can't build that. I mean, you don't own my land, I own it. And yeah, it's a visceral reaction of, down with the state kind of a thing. And it can either lead, if it's a hard process, it's going to lead to either people not doing it, which is urban decay, or people doing it illegally, which just creates a bigger problem, as lots get passed on to other people, and then they try to do it right, and they realize they have an illegal addition to their house, not just an illegal lot. So it's definitely got to be encouraged, and we got to have people coming in to get the proper permits to do what they want to do. But yeah, if it's too hard or too difficult, they either won't do it and the city falls apart, or they do it illegally and just pushes the problem, makes it bigger down the road.
If they do it illegally, though, do we not have in this, though, that if you have an illegal lot, you don't get utilities?
We have the right not to extend it.
Right, okay. So even if they did that and they tried to build something, they're going to...
Well, but I'm thinking about just, you own a lot, you have a house on it, you want to do a small addition off the back of it, city says it's not platted, you have to plat it before we give you a building permit.
Just do it anyway.
Well, I'm just going to do it anyway. You already got, electric in the house,
Well, and
you already got sewer.
That was another thing that was big for me with redoing this, is putting a lot more teeth in the ordinance, so that if somebody were to do something like that, the city has the teeth to go, well, hold on a second, you can't just do whatever you want. so that we're treating everybody fairly and the repercussions of doing something like that. But for me, we have to have the exemptions. It's just a matter of whether or not 120 is the right number, or we want to go bigger or smaller, because without it, then everybody has to do it no matter what. And, you know, if we just don't have the requirement at all, then we continue going like we have been, or we have nothing platted. So it's really that 120 number is the...
Yeah, and I do believe as we go forward and we have other groups and stakeholders who look at this, we're going to hear some more comments, and that 120 might not be the number that winds up being approved. You know, we're just taking the first look at it with you guys tonight.
Well, and that's why I was asking about the number, because the last thing I want to do, you guys have put way more hours in it than anybody else, and to then go arbitrarily, well, maybe we should be, so I'm just trying to find out.
I promise you, we will let you know.
You're not stepping on anyone's toes.
That's what we're talking about, plotting. Just throw an example out there. What if I just didn't like my house anymore and I just tear it down next week? Would I have to go through the survey and replotting and start all over again like there was nothing ever there?
Yes, isn't the answer yes, Dave?
The answer is yes, except that if you built the exact same footprint, we would probably let it go by. But presumably, if you didn't like your house, you're going to build something different. So yes, we would require it to be platted.
Money. I think the legal lots of record phrase, I welcome that phrase, because I live on a legal lot of record. And if I wanted, like, I have considered adding on a room I have enough space in my backyard to add on. Now, from your perspective, you're in a kind of a state of confusion because you've had your property surveyed. At this point, you're not sure if it's a legal lot of record, and if I were you, I would want to know. So I can understand his point of view here, because he's had it surveyed so many times, he doesn't know if it's considered a legal lot of record or not, and I would want to know the answer to that. Whereas my property has never been surveyed, so I know it is as it is. But I do kind of feel like after all of the discussion that maybe that number should be revisited. Because I'm not good at math, and based on our discussion, if that is the size of a small room, then maybe we should revisit that number itself. I do have I want to clarify something that I heard somebody say. If someone moves onto a property, moving into Bastrop, is it their responsibility to find out if that is a legal lot of record, if that property is considered a legal lot of record, or is that...
It would be a buyer due diligence thing
Okay.
they'd have to do on there. So it'd be a buyer's due diligence. If you came in and you were trying to figure out, am I buying a legal or illegal lot, that would be the onus would be on the buyer during their due diligence to make sure that was the case.
How do you do that?
They'd probably come down and visit them.
Yeah.
And they'll get sent to the county to dig through the records. But so let's kind of take a deep breath. I got a house, I put it up for sale, somebody buys it, I have it surveyed, I get a clear title policy on it, I have an address, I changed the water service to my name, I changed the wastewater service to my name. There are many people that will never be impacted by this. It's when so the moving to Bastrop, you can move to Bastrop and buy a house anywhere, and it may or may not be a lot of record or a platted lot, but you're able to move in, you're able to have services, all of that's fine. It's when you start changing things.
Right.
That, whether it's dramatic changes to your house, or buying a lot next door, or giving some little bit of this lot, and there's 2 lots and we're going to make 3 lots out of it. That's when, and that creates problems for us, because if you've given a little bit of your lot to somebody and then you run a water line to that house, because maybe you tee off, it can turn into a nightmare. We can turn into, there's storm sewer that's not inside an easement. Back to the point of, there's a community perspective. It's not so much your lot, it's also your neighbors. You have an expectation that the city's protected you from your neighbors, for lack of a better term. That
Right.
they're not going to come build on your property.
Right, and I just wanted clarity on that. And then One other thing. So another point was made that if someone moved in and had their property surveyed and realized that your property actually kind of ran over into theirs, and I am on a legal lot of record at that point, would I at that point have to have my property platted because my property was actually wrong?
If you had a legal lot of record, well, it depends on why your property was wrong.
At that point, the neighbor is trying to force you to do something. That would be a civil matter that the city wouldn't get involved in.
I wouldn't have to, at that point, have my property platted.
Not according to the city. That would be you might want to defend yourself.
Your attorney might tell you that you need to do that, but at that point, you'll be paying money to somebody else for other things, but it won't be driven by the
other
city.
thing, we also, on the north side of the city, we also have a lot of properties that share utilities that we don't know about. And so something like this, if I moved in, found out that, I actually had a house like this, so the sewer runs up to the property, and then the neighbor's house just happens to tie into my sewer, it'd be perfectly legal for somebody to come in and, stop that sewer shareage right there, and then all of a sudden that neighbor, is going to be forced to pay thousands of dollars to have a sewer rerun,
sewer tap.
to have a tap done and everything else. So just having properties platted is needed, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. It's just going to be a matter of where the trigger is at. And I think, like the city manager said, it's just a matter of where you put that and how many people are on either side of that trigger.
Mayor and council, I visited quickly with Chairman Moore, and maybe a suggestion that is punted back to P&Z for some discussion is Jennifer and I have talked, and on average, probably the houses downtown are 1,500, 2,000 square feet. And so 10%, and so you cap it at no more than 200 square feet or 10% of your square footage, whichever's less. And then that gives flexibility so that, and y'all can debate that, but what that gives is somebody that walks through the door a rhyme or reason for the number. We determine that 10% or greater is a major expansion of your property. And at a major expansion of your property, we need you to plat. And so now staff at least can justify the number whether you like it or not. And maybe, it's 200 or whatever, but that's for them to debate. But what concerns me is that 120 square foot staff recommended, and it's capricious and arbitrary, and that's a limb we get chewed off of daily, and it just doesn't work. So we can agree to disagree, but I think everybody wants a logical reason for why things have to be the way they are. And at least I can understand what I don't like or agree with versus, well, why not 125? Why not 130?
Matt, were you going to ask something when she's...
No, but I think it's a wonderful idea. I was just kind of agreeing with my eyes, which may have invoked the question. Yeah.
Yeah, if you guys are okay with that. The things that I've heard that I like tonight is 10% and, the 200 or less, because if you live in a McMansion and it's 10%, that can be a really big deal, and we still want you platted. But 10%, 200 or less seems to make sense to me. I really like the idea of certain parameters to waive the platting fee. If the city's needing it and it's going to be helpful, then just waive the platting fee in those circumstances. And the ability that, because there'll be a circumstance that we can't all think of, I have a special circumstance and I want to go plead my case to P&Z, and I trust you guys to be fair and reasonable. If we give them platting, which I know we haven't voted on yet, and I'm thrilled with council if we do give them platting, if they are turned down, do they have the ability to appeal to council if they don't like P&Z's decision, or if we give it to them, they get their answer and they're done?
Well, and I may defer to legal counsel, but my experience has been that they might be able to appeal to council, but council can't approve the plat. Council either approves them all or approves none of them.
It's also ministerial, so it's not, it's, every time we look at a plat, the question is, staff, do they meet the requirements? Yes? Sounds good, because we can talk about it and debate it.
Oh, I was talking about if they come to you for a variance and you don't approve, but I'm fine. If it's y'all, Councilmember elect.
I had one more question on this exemption. Are there, let's say I build 120 square foot this year, can I come back next year and build another 120 square feet and get an exemption? And then the year after, pretty soon I'll have a 5,000 square foot house. But if I built it 120 at a time, does that keep me from platting?
We probably need to tighten up that language.
I'm just curious. Leave it to Drew to think of the sneaky stuff.
I'm telling you, I'm just curious.
No, that's
No, that's a good point.
Good. Now, do you see why it has taken us so long to get to this point? Because we've wrangled, but this is only one.
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
Spent an hour on this one. Shall we move ahead?
All righty.
Let's move on.
Let's see, make sure I didn't jump ahead too far. So parkland dedication, keeping the same requirement of 1 acre for every 100 dwelling units. That's a fairly common ratio, and there's some reasons that you would use that. We are allowing dedication of floodplain land as parkland. Your current ordinance discourages floodplain, but there are some reasons why you would want to control floodplain. And keep in mind, when we say parkland, that doesn't mean there's ball fields everywhere. You know, sometimes parkland is just open, undeveloped space. But if we take the floodplain, we're only going to give you partial credit for that. Because if you're in the floodway, you can't do anything with it anyway. So we're not going to give you credit for that. If you're in that floodway fringe, you could develop it, but we'd only give you half credit for that. We would allow a 50% credit for private parks and gated communities. We'll talk about gated communities a little bit later because that's a new addition. We are requiring dedication of parkland in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, and we have recommended that the HOA be responsible for owning and managing that until the city annexes it. But that's an area when I've got a slide later on that talks about some of the county concerns because it's in the county until we annex it. It's in our ETJ, but it's still in the county. They're not real excited yet about taking over those parks and have some concerns about HOAs. I think that there are ways to strengthen the HOA so it doesn't go away. And then we still have some provisions in there for a trail system. I have not changed those, but I think at some point in time we want to revisit the section on trails. I mentioned the changes to the process. First is that it requires a sketch plat review. And again, that's that rough sketch so that we can basically identify where it's located. Does it in the ETJ, what part of the ETJ it's in, because we have different regs in different parts of the ETJ. How difficult the plat may be, so it's a standard process, or a short form process, or an administrative process. As I mentioned, we delegate the authority to P&Z. We're going to have greater use of developers agreements. Most cities, when a developer comes in, he wants to file the plat right away because he usually wants to borrow money against it. And so we would enter into a contract with the developer that says, yes, we'll file the plat, but you have to do this, this, and this. It's a contractual agreement between the city and the developer to provide what needs to be provided. Been a little loose in this city about doing that. We want to tighten that up and use it more often. And then clarify about plat expirations. State law says that plats can't last forever until they're filed at the courthouse. And under the vesting statute, a developer is entitled to develop under the rules in effect at the first of a series of permits. So most cities don't say that the preliminary plat is the first. So whatever rules are in effect at that time, he can use there and forever unless you have a provision for that preliminary plat to expire at some point in time. Now, your current ordinance has a 1-year expiration. I think that's too soon. So we're proposing a 2-year expiration. Your ordinance also has a provision for final plat expirations, which is a little unusual, but there are some plats in this city that have gone through the process but have never been filed at the courthouse. And so there needs to be a way to clear out those plats at some point in time And the reason they haven't been filed is because they didn't build the infrastructure they were supposed to do. And you don't want to file a plat, allow people to sell lots, and you don't have the infrastructure there to support it. Form and content requirements are greatly expanded and clarified about what's required. We want to make sure that we have everything that we need. Additional requirements for easements and plat notes. Revised number of submittals to reflect what we actually need. And the more we get into electronic submittals, the fewer submittals we'll need because we'll have it electronically. Have a requirement to submit drainage plans earlier in the process. A lot of developers, nothing against engineers, but a lot of engineers, they take their subdivision as a flat piece of paper on the drawing board and assume that the earth is the same way. And so they will go in and kind of mass clear everything, squeeze as many lots as they can fit in their piece of property, and then say, oh, how do I handle the drainage? And so you end up with a lot more storm drains and stuff that you might not necessarily have. If we can start looking at drainage early in the process, we could start avoiding some of that underground storm draining and actually can save the developer money in the long term. Now, he may not get as many lots as he might otherwise, but he'll have a higher profit per lot than he would have if he had to build all the infrastructure.
When are you asking for drainage plans? Earlier in the process isn't
preliminary
plat?
We're actually asking for a preliminary sketch at the sketch plat stage. So, but yes, preliminary plat and then final plat would each have a drainage plan component.
And Mayor and Council, I think that is extraordinarily smart because the number one issue you've charged us to fix is drainage. It's a huge problem. It's a huge fear in this community. And we need to make sure early on that it's not an afterthought, but it's a planned event.
Well, and Patrick will confirm this. Good developers, they've done drainage as a part of their feasibility. They may not have done the final design, but they've looked at it. And I won't take personally your comments about engineers, but there are good developers and there are people who develop to make money, and we want to make it easy for good developers, and so that's not. I'm just sharing. It's my opinion that is not an onerous thing for someone to come up with. They ought to have an idea on the drainage, and it will help identify things early on.
We're adding more specifics on engineering plans. I've already had some people ask, well, why did you reference the city of Austin in there? We need a set of standard specifications, and there is not a regional set of specifications in this area like there is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Wesley looked around, and he landed on the city of Austin's standard specifications. I think long-term, we will probably either develop our own or we go in with other people to develop our own set. But in the short term, and this is not necessarily design, but it's construction specifications for, what kind of concrete do you actually use? What kind of steel do you actually use in the roadway? Those kinds of specifications.
Mayor and Council and Commissioners, I will tell you that to some extent, these are standards that are way better than what we have. And we've got to crawl before we walk. We know from the drainage study that we got from Half and Associates that we have 4 different types of soil content on the hill. The closer we get to downtown Bastrop around the river, it's a soil type. And then when we cross the river, there's yet another soil type. So to Dave's point, as we create bandwidth and can really drill down to how to develop Bastrop correctly, we can fix these to be uniquely Bastrop, but we got to start somewhere. So this is a good starting place. But we know, and I've talked about it before, that we really have 3 cities in one. And a one-size-fits-all approach to development is part of how we got here. And so we've got to raise the standards because we've got a lot of development coming to us. And once we get to a place that we can then critique what we've done, we can go back and begin to fix that. So I know we work real hard not to be Austin, but it's better than where we are.
Is it gonna be a date on it? City of Austin standards as of, or every time City of Austin changes their standards, we're trying to keep up with their changes?
As I recall, it's as it currently changes, and we can visit that.
I've got some heartburn with that because.
And just remember, we're talking about specifications for materials and construction, and I don't think those change that often.
I agree with that. The way that is generally written, that causes me alarm. So if it truly is construction materials, the fact is you're getting concrete from where everybody else is getting concrete. They're making it all the City of Austin standards. It's not a big deal. I have no problem with that. It's some of the, when you say engineering plans, that makes me think of other things that maybe you're not necessarily addressing.
The alternate would be to rely on the TxDOT standards, those specifications. And there are problems with the TxDOT specifications.
There's a lot.
Would it be, because I absolutely get where the mayor's going, there's some things they do, we're not interested in fighting that battle, and I don't want to wake up tomorrow having to fight that battle. So perhaps what we can do is adopt them as of today, and then periodically see what's amended and bring it to you for local consideration.
You P&Z, you council.
However it goes through the process. But so in other words, as of June 1st, 2018, we're going to adopt their standards. And then twice a year, we'll go back and look at it, and then we'll bring you the changes. If you think they're worth adopting, we will. If you don't, then you say, we're not going to bother with that. And then we're not having to keep up with the Joneses that we don't want to have to keep up with.
I'm fine with that. If it really is more materials than anything else, I would suggest that you run that by the Construction Standards Board before, because they have a background that you guys don't have, and their input would be valuable, in my opinion.
Why Austin?
Because it was the best one in this particular region. A lot of the other cities, San Marcos and stuff, tend to rely back on Austin. Yeah, it's an expense for a city to develop their own, and again, that might be something that we want to do, or we want to get together with, Elgin and Smithville and come up with a county standard. But at this point in time, we don't have that.
I just know that there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction to using something. I mean, Austin has such a bad reputation for certain development.
Yeah, and again, it's construction materials. It's not that. Another option is the North Central Texas Council of Governments has their set of standard specifications, but I thought that was too far afield,
I'm fine with the City of Austin, but it's not so much engineering plan. Are you trying to say blanket standard specifications, or is it really and truly just materials?
It's the construction materials and construction techniques.
I think that's fine. Take off engineering plans, say construction materials, and I think you ought to run it by the construction standards. Okay. Are you guys comfortable with that, planning and zoning, for them to take a quick look at it?
Absolutely.
I mentioned the greater use of developer agreements and financial assurance. We have eliminated letters of credit as a form of financial assurance, and that was at the recommendation of our city attorney, because they have found that they're only as good as the bank they're drawn on. I had the experience of having a letter of credit on one of Mr. Keating's savings and loans that went under, and so it's no good. And then there's lots of ways that letters of credit are just hard to collect on. So we will use bonds, those kinds of things. And then our current maintenance bond is like 20% for 2 years. Well, that means that you're on the hook for 80% if something catastrophic goes wrong. So it's not uncommon to require 100%. And the P&Z they had Wesley kind of look at various cities around, and after some discussion, we ended up with 100% for 2 years. Design standards, we basically have 4 different designs right now. We were eliminating the suburban and the small rural design standards. So we're basically just having city or standard design, and then the rural design that would be out in ETJ. There's been a lot of interest in requiring low impact development techniques. So I have a list in the ordinance of about 20 different kinds of things to do, and we're just requiring the developer use 2 of those. So we're giving them a lot of flexibility. We do add reference to the Houston toad habitat because it does affect development. We're not adding standards there, but we're making sure that people look at it and recognize that, hey, there is an issue, and our language basically follows the county's requirements. And then we're adding some provisions for wildfire protection. And basically what we're adding is a requirement for the 30-foot buffer around a structure to be kept clear. Now, in the full text of the ordinance, you'll notice at the top of the first page, there's a bunch of references to other ordinances. This will require an amendment to our nuisance ordinance, basically the weed ordinance, because you might show that on a plat, but somebody has to make sure that it's kept clear so you don't have a lot of brush and stuff up next to a house and then wonder why it burns.
David?
Yes.
Before you jump off to the next one. Your second item up there, low impact development practices. Considering where we are as a society today, I think we need to be very aggressive in this area. Looking at how do we minimize the impact, how do we make Bastrop a more sustainable community with it. So, I mean, we're starting off saying 2 here, but maybe long term we might want to look at, can we accelerate that? Can we be more aggressive in this area to develop communities in areas that have a lower environmental impact?
It makes me think of Drew. Maybe if we're wanting them to do that, then is there a reward? Is there an incentive of some point? If they do 14 of them, then do they?
One of the things that is not apparently used a lot here is plan developments. And I've done a lot of zoning in my life, and I've only done one straight zoning. So I like plan developments. And the reason I like it is it gives us the flexibility to do what you just said. And that is, you the developer, want some things our code doesn't. Okay, well, great. Well, let's show you what we want. And so it really does give us the flexibility so that if you are a particular lot owner or small developer, then you're making it better than it was. But if you're going to come and develop 60, 100, 300 acres, then yeah, we absolutely now have something. What do y'all want? Well, we got 20 of these things we'd like to have, and for every one that you help us with. And so what I would say to you is that this kind of stuff is extraordinarily helpful to staff, because we often get a developer that wants a whole lot of stuff, and we need to protect the community, and we need to know what's important. So these kinds of things go on our checklist of when we're negotiating, what are we negotiating for?
So you may recall in one of our work sessions we talked about 2 different design approaches. One is the city design approach, and it's basically kind of redesigning what Old Town is like. And so what we're requiring are small blocks that promotes walkability. The approach we're taking here, instead of doing block lengths or those kinds of things, we're requiring a maximum block perimeter. So you can't have a block that exceeds 1,600 square feet or linear feet around the perimeter, and that's going to force smaller blocks. And in fact, in downtown, most of the blocks are at approximately that level. So that's what you would kind of end up having. And it's intended for inside the city with water and sewer. It's designed for pedestrians instead of just cars. We're requiring that a lot of traffic calming on the streets, so and lower design speeds on the streets to promote walkability. We are proposing that we require alleys for rear entry dwellings for lots less than 60 foot of width, so that we can avoid the 40-foot lots, 24 of which is the garage. So nothing wrong with 40-foot wide lots, but let's have the garage be in the rear so that you actually have a building front, so it makes the streetscape a lot better. Mentioned the 1,600 feet. You could have some longer blocks in some situations if you cut the block in half with what's called a civic open space lot, where you could put the pedestrian could cross there, but not the cars. Commercial shopping centers could meet the block perimeter just simply by using private drive aisles. instead of having the big block Walmart type thing, you could have a large shopping center, but just break up that strip with some drive so it simulates a smaller block. And of course, industrial blocks are a little different breed, so we have a little different approaches to how to address industrial lots. Out in the rural area, you remember I talked about the 5-step process to design. Basically, you calculate the maximum density at 2 units per acre or 1 unit per acre, and that's the number of units you get. And then you go through a set where you can take all of those dwelling units and kind of cluster them in one area. So it's actually the same number of units. That's the same number of units as that would have been, but you've actually preserved a lot of open space. And we would have required that open space be preserved with a conservation easement or a agricultural easement. You know, people want to live in the rural area, and they say, well, I want to be on 2-acre lots. Well, you drive down the street with 2-acre lots, that just means the houses are 400 feet apart. It's not rural anymore, it's just a large lot subdivision. This approach actually creates more of a rural character. Tree preservation we've talked about, not really any changes since we last talked. It requires preservation or mitigation of certain trees over 10 inches in diameter. And the term of art in the tree business is diameter at breast height. You got to measure the tree somewhere, and so breast height is about where they use to measure diameter. It requires a tree survey, and developers not going to be happy about that. But that's how else will we know what's out there and know what to preserve, what to protect, and what to mitigate. It does not apply to developments that are already in process. Does it apply to a current homeowner with a 1-acre lot? You can do whatever you want with the trees on your property. If the tree is diseased or dying, creating a nuisance or damaging your foundation, you can take that tree down. Trees in the right-of-way, easements, drainage facilities, utility routes, visibility triangles. You know, we don't want a tree blocking the view around the corner. We'll allow that tree to come down. And anything less than 10 inches in diameter, you can take down. So you can clear all the brush, small trees, etc. on your property.
Okay, so do I have to have an arborist come out and tell me that my dead tree is dying?
It has a provision for not necessarily an arborist, but somebody, a nurse, somebody with some, you know, for you just to walk in and say, my tree's dying, I'm going to cut it down, we probably want a little bit more than that.
How are you going to enforce that?
We're probably not, except by complaint or driving down the street and see somebody cutting down a tree.
And the 1 acre is because?
Just to allow a single family owner the
no,
right
I'm saying
to...
why?
We don't want to be
less than 2 acres.
We don't want to be the city of Austin where you try to cut down, you know, if I want to cut down a tree and the city says no. So we kind of talked about this too, that if it's an acre or less, you could do pretty much whatever you want, and an acre or less covers most of the lots inside the city anyway, as they currently are. And I think, David, this is mostly for developers, not so much for big. We want to make sure that they come in and clear 100 acres, that we're not losing trees that we want to keep, more than trying to keep a homeowner from cutting a tree down.
So if it doesn't apply to, is there a reason that it's not just, it doesn't apply to a single family lot?
Trees are, shade is money. And so you mentioned that we want to encourage quality developers. Quality developers understand that trees sell lots, and they help with money. Not everybody we walk through the door gets that. And one of the things we want to protect is the lost pines. I mean, you can go, and I always get confused, you can go west and you run out of trees, you start coming this way, and then you have trees and then they go away. So the truth of the matter is they can come in and not do this and cut them down, and now what?
No, we're not having the same conversation, because a developer that comes in, they're automatically not falling in that doesn't. they don't get an exemption to it. So it's not the developer walking in that you're doing. I'm saying
We do have some infill developers that come in and buy smaller lots. And so if it's the property owner, that's not a problem, but we do have some developers that are coming in and buying land, subdividing in town, and you could inadvertently create some issues where these magnificent oak trees downtown disappear because it's not efficient to build a house and lay the
but if it's less
infrastructure.
than an acre, which is, if you had more than an acre, that tree's probably not going to be a problem. So what you just described is more likely going to happen on a smaller lot, which is exempt, which means they can cut down the tree.
You could subdivide an acre lot. And so he'd buy it at an acre or an acre and a half, and he'd take down the trees and then come in and subdivide it.
I think what the mayor's getting at is if we have somebody this is my private property and that tree is ugly or it's blocking my view or whatever, and I live on an acre and a half, how can I just cut it down? So I think that's the conversation that she's having, I think.
Yeah,
right?
because the point of, as soon as they've divided it, then it's not they're not part of the exemption. That's a different deal. So if it's infill and I buy an acre or I buy less than an acre, according to this, I can cut down any tree I want because it's less than an acre.
This whole thing was designed to help
developers.
protect the trees to protect the trees that we have, but also not be our neighbors to the west where it's like, you want to cut down a 4-inch diameter tree? No, we're just going to tell you can't do it. So we spent some time talking.
Dave, is the answer to this, if you have a legal lot of record or a platted single-family piece of property, regardless of the size, it doesn't matter. You can cut it down and get away from this arbitrary number of less than an acre.
Where I'm at is, why did you pick 1 acre? That's what I'm asking.
And the question may be, is 1 acre the right number? But yeah, as is written, because you could say, well, I have 40 acres, which is a legal lot, and can I cut down all the trees on my 40 acres? Or Fort Worth just had 52 acres in East Fort Worth oaks that got toned down.
What's the appeal process for somebody? Or I'm sorry, that's a bad question. What if I have 1.5 acres? Is there, and I just don't like the tree because I'm anti-tree. What is the process if they want to do that? Or are we just saying no?
As I recall, there is a provision for some staff discretion in that. And of course, any part of the subdivision ordinance has a provision for waivers.
Hang on a second. I think Sue Ann's wanting to say something.
Well, this has been troublesome for me from the beginning because what happens when you buy your perfect lot and it's 1.2 acres and you can't put your dream house on it because there's a tree there that's 11 inches in diameter. I mean, how does one deal with that?
Get a taller person. Breast height higher.
Because there are,
that's a horrible constraint to put on.
Because there are exemptions for trees within the building footprint and within other, obviously, if we're trying to build a road and there are trees in the way, we can't get the road through unless we take the trees down. So there are provisions for house site and stuff like that.
Okay. Dave, very seldom do I have a problem with staff discretion, but I do on this. We're not going to be God, Jesus, the 12 disciples, and judge and jury on this. If they need an exception, I don't think we ought to make it cumbersome. I don't think there ought to be a fee. They can just bring pictures, but this group needs to decide whether the tree comes down. I don't want to have to defend that.
So again, did staff recommend an acre, and was that's a standard 1 acre or less? It's a number that you picked, and did you guys discuss 1 acre or not?
There was not a lot of discussion about the 1 acre. The 1 acre is a standard that we proposed.
I think the overall concern was that a homeowner can kind of do what they want. It's not encumbering a homeowner. And I always thought kind of what you're saying. You've got bigger lots, smaller lots, people live on them. And again, I brought this up with a few other things, but I don't know how feasible it is. But the state of Texas gives a homestead exemption and charges you fewer taxes on that piece of property because they determine where you live deserves special consideration. And I don't know why we can't use a similar standard for people that own a home. They've got a homestead exemption with the state. It's obviously their primary residence. They should be allowed more latitude than someone who lives in Austin, is buying, half an acre here in Bastrop, subdividing it, into 2 or 3 different lots and cutting all the trees down. Someone who can't prove that they're living on their land, I think, they need to prove a different standard.
I like that homestead exemption, but for his example, if somebody's come, they live somewhere else, they've bought a lot, as soon as they try to make it into 3 lots, they're not.
Triggers it,
this.
yeah.
That doesn't.
Right.
Now they have to. If they're dividing it into 3 lots, they've got to get a tree
Right.
survey, and we'll know where those trees are. Now they've got a legal plat. Matt's bought one of the lots. He's now homesteading that lot. Then it's okay for him to cut down the tree?
Right.
But they are saved at the time of development.
I thought we had a provision here that added notes to the plat that prohibited that in the future. Am I misremembering?
There are notes to the plat regarding tree mitigation so that you don't have a situation where the developer came in, mitigated the trees, and then all the homeowners come in and cut them all down. And as I recall, you were all just designated a tree city, right? Yeah. So trees should have a high priority to you. But this gives some flexibility to the current homeowner to be able to do something. But the person that comes in and buys 3 acres with the intent of subdividing, but he sits on it for a year, cuts all the trees down, and then the next year comes in wanting to subdivide, is circumvented the process.
The other thing for your example, Matt, is, if I live on 40 acres, have a house on 40 acres, right, and I could just go clear all those down. If a developer wants to buy it, we could just make a provision in the contract that says, I'll clear the lot because I'm now the owner and I have homestead. There's ways to get around that.
Well, I would agree. There's always a way, and it's, someone's going to add 120 square feet on their house 7 times and, end up with their little mansion.
Can we settle this with, as is, with the right to appeal to P&Z?
Yep.
And then it's not at staff discretion. There's allocations for any type of scenario, and everybody will hear it and go with your gut.
And my recollection is the initial appeal is to staff. Anything you didn't like with staff, then you can go on to P&Z already, and we can skip the staff and put the burden on P&Z to make the tough decisions.
I am always leery when we get pigeonholed as good old boy. Oh, well, it was the mayor's, we got to take care of the mayor, but, we don't like so-and-so over there, so we told them no. So the consistency piece is critically important. So I think they just need to go to the jury of 9, and if they can convince 5 of them it's the right answer. If they can't, then it just saved us the heartache.
Okay.
I just have one, and I'm sorry, on your very first one where it's breast high, is that me or Gary Shift? So it just kind of depends. So if I get the tallest person to go over there, I think you might want to pick a measurement. It's a standard.
It's actually 4.5 feet.
Okay. See, that is my head high.
But
but anybody reading it, you might want to.
It's a standard. It's like everybody knows a yard is 36 inches. Yeah, and there's probably a definition.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's in the definition. It has different standards for different kinds of trees. Secondary trees include mesquite, bodark, ash juniper, locust, hackberry, gumbomelia, box elder, cottonwood. I don't want to use the word trash trees, but these are trees with not as high a value as other trees, so we don't protect them as much. Then large secondary trees are those over 18 inches. When they get to be really big, maybe they do have more value. And then quality trees like the pines and the oaks and maples are anything other than those initial species. And then protected trees are those over 18 inches. And then we have a set of different standards for each of those different kinds of trees. Easements.
Before we leave trees, I think it's a hard thing for us from a code enforcement for the city to enforce those rules. And the thing that bothers me about it is by the time it's cut down and you can't put the tree back up. and I don't know the answer to that, but I'm thinking that if folks don't know that they have a legal platted lot, how are they going to know that they weren't supposed to cut down that tree?
I've been in cities that did this, and I've been in cities that didn't, and there's no magic number.
Okay.
But what ends up happening is chances are really good if it's a property owner and they cut down a tree, it's never going to make our radar. If we ride by and there's a lot of trees being cut down and there's tree trimming things out there, we're going to put a stop work order on it. And we'll go to court on that one. And because Bastrop is now fixing to be a municipal court of record, it makes it very easy for us to now go in and say, trees are important to us. Mm-hmm. There's a process. And one of two things are going to happen. They're going to stop and go through the process and get the approval, or we're going to court to uphold the standard because trees are important. They add value. They add long-term sustainability. So it is catch it if you can, catch it if you can't. Most of the time, if it's a property owner on a small lot, we're not going to catch it. It's going to be fine. But if it's sizable, somebody will turn them in or we'll see them.
And then do you also have a natural causes at all? Because there's sometimes windstorms come through and the tree's down and there's nothing you can do. And was there an exception for that? Okay.
One other thing that I thought was important when we went over this, and David can correct me, we also have a provision where during development you can pay a fee in lieu of saving those trees, but you can't just do that all the way. You can't just come in, clear out all the trees and pay a fee and be done. But if you need to clear out some of those trees and make it work, you do that. And if they met this requirement, you just pay a fee for those, and that would go back into replanting trees in other places. So.
And there'll be lots of public education as we go forward.
And in cities that do this, typically the tree mitigation fund are the trees planted on Arbor Day.
Easements. One of the things that we are doing is we're actually reducing the size of these easements that we're requiring. Currently, BPNL requires a 20-foot wide easement for an electric line, which makes sense. So you got to get a truck by the poles, but they also require that in the front yard next to a 50-foot wide street. So we're going to reduce that requirement down to 10 feet where it's adjacent to a street. So we'll actually, and we were having trouble in the form-based code, because the form-based code, the idea is to bring the buildings close to the street, and then we had BPNL saying, no, you got to be back 20 feet. So we're trying to resolve that discrepancy.
One question on that. So if you're in the downtown and you do have a platted lot with a 20-foot front easement that's on there, is that administratively reduced to 10, even though it's printed on the plat?
It's not automatically, but there is a way to revise the plat. So we can reduce or eliminate easements that are not required.
Another fee, another survey.
Yeah.
Because we look in the back and say, people without platted lots, we're calling them either illegal or legal lots of record and forcing them to a current standard. But as we change our standard, I don't get why that doesn't apply retroactively. The same way we're forcing people to come forward, we can also force our decisions backward.
It does require filing at the courthouse, and they're going to charge fees on that.
I think there's a difference between what's legal and what the city decides to enforce. You can't change an easement without
absolutely.
going
I agree.
You have to file at the courthouse.
It's filed with the city, or with the county, so it's in there. But someone comes and wants to build in that area, they're going to have to jump through those hoops rather than just saying, well, technically.
The problem with that is because it's been a 20-foot easement, there could be something in that. And if you just blanketly say, now we're going to make it 10, you may have something outside of the easement now.
Yeah, and completely understand that.
I have a question. Councilman Nelson, go on. You haven't said a word.
Dave, is this also applicable to those areas that aren't served by BPNL?
Yes, but it does call out BPNL. And my last slide, when we get there, is our next steps will be to be reaching out to the other franchised utilities so that we can make sure that we're covering what Blue Bonnet needs and what LCRA may need, those kinds of things.
We have someone who doesn't have a legal lot of record, and all of a sudden they have to replat, and they don't. And I can't think of an example, but they don't meet the easement requirements? What happens then?
Well, if they're just a lot of record and don't have, they're probably not an easement on their property to begin with. And so then it would just be a matter of whether BP&L needs that easement to go across the front of their property. If they're already getting electrical service, then there's probably not a need for an additional easement. One of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to get away from requiring everybody to have a 20-foot easement, because it's not necessarily required in every situation. And so we would just have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis, whether we need
If we don't change it, it's just going to stay at 20, right?
Right.
So it's going to be there either way. We're just trying to pull it down to 10 from 20, but it's going to be there either way.
I've got a whole truckload of them. I've got to meet with you privately afterward.
Public open space easements or visibility triangles, and I tried to get a figure of that, and it didn't make it in. Currently, we have a pretty standard 25 by 25 foot triangle that you put on the corner of your property if you're at a corner of street intersection. But if you've ever been by those, you know that that doesn't always work because you can't always see around that obstruction. So the new public open space easement requires more design so that you actually visibly see down the street. The size of those triangles depends on the speed of the cars coming toward you. So you actually look at, where you're sitting in a car versus looking down the street. And in some cases, it actually reduces the amount of property that gets encumbered by that easement rather than just a simple 25 by 25. It requires dedication of the 100-year floodplain as a floodplain easement. And then there will be a statement on the face of the plat that talks about all the things that you can't do in a floodplain without doing certain things. This is new. We're also requiring a 50-foot stream bank buffer. So adjacent to the major creeks like Colorado, Gills Branch, Piney Creek, we're requiring an additional 50-foot from the top of bank as a stream bank buffer. Everybody wants to build their house right up to the bank of the river, then they get some erosion, and now it's the city's problem to try to fix it. This will help solve some of those issues because it moves the house further from the stream, and it also protects the environmental factors associated with the stream. And by leaving the vegetation there, it helps preserve the bank as well.
So can I build anything in that buffer or not?
No.
So my fence has to be 50 feet back?
I don't recall about fences, but we wouldn't want, and I'd caution you about putting storage buildings and stuff like that back there.
Wouldn't it just be impervious cover?
I don't know that we're that specific as it currently is. So if we need to beef up this,
But most of the easements that I've seen that we have are it's like impervious cover. So
and that's why I was thinking, I would think I can have my fence on the property line, and if the fence falls in, then that's life. But you're trying to protect people from themselves by not having a impervious cover permanent structure.
Right.
So you're going to look at that, or you?
We can relook at that.
Yeah, I think that should be clarified personally.
And then we're strengthening, we already require cross-access easements in commercial areas. We're just specifying that. This is a situation where you have a business next to another business. You ought to be able to get between those two businesses without having to get out in the public street, causing congestion, causing additional traffic access points. So we just simply require that commercial businesses have an access easement between the adjacent properties. And most of the newer developments, we've been doing that. There's still some older ones that, and you can usually see where it is.
An access easement and pavement you can drive on is two different things.
No, it has to be paved.
Okay.
Street section, we have reduced the threshold for our traffic impact analysis. We currently only require TIAs if they have over 2,000 trips per day. We're reducing that down to 1,000 trips per day, or more importantly, 100 trips per hour. It's the peak hour that's usually the problem, and our current threshold tended to miss that. We're combined all the street requirements into a single table. Yes, the table is about 4 pages long, but it's better than having to read through all the text to see what standard applied where.
David, I've got a comment on that one. Yeah, the table's nice. It makes it very easy to read. I have a little bit of heartburn with the residential part of the table. You talk about narrower widths and streets, and the number you've got in there for narrower widths and residential streets, I think, is getting us too narrow. This town, we like our pickup trucks, and especially our dualies. I think we need to widen that back up to allow for what kind of cars we have in this town.
What is it?
I'll say it's probably 26.
Yeah, it's 26. I think we need to push it back up over 30, maybe 36. Wide enough so you can put a car on each side and still have room. A dually on each side, because we've got them in this town, a lot of them. And you can still drive a fire engine down the center.
A standard suburban street is 30 foot wide. So going a bit wider than that is getting to be more of a collector type.
And you are significantly impacting walkability and the pedestrians' ability to feel safe walking down the street.
Yeah.
And the problem, Richard, is when you get 36 feet wide, it looks like a freeway, so people drive like it's a freeway.
That's the other idea behind the narrow streets is traffic control. They feel more closed in, so they drive slower, right? Mm-hmm. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, and I noticed in there also for residential, you drop the speed limit to 30. I think you need to go down to 25 for residential.
A state law provision that prevents you from doing that. We had a consultant in town yesterday to help us with the walkability concept, and she started there with us.
Okay.
And what's interesting is, and I'm not picking on you, but those two things that you want, I want the street wider and I want the speed limit slower, you got to pick a side, because if you make the street wider, they are going to drive faster regardless of what the posting is. And when you narrow the street down, everybody slows down. If you're exactly to your point, if there's a dually parked in front and there's two cars passing each other, everybody's going to be driving slower. Well, if you're in a residential neighborhood and there's kids playing, I want you driving slower anyway. So that I would not be for. Do you have it currently at 27, 26? 26. I don't see Chief Wobus, but that sounds reasonable. Is that?
A fire truck, you can get a fire lane as small as 20 feet.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So I think we're cool on that. Are you? I guess where I'm really going, and I don't want to make eye contact with Richard, is do you want it even smaller than 26?
Well, we internally end up with conflict. I have Richards on my team. I have you on my team. There's me. So I'm not going to get any more consensus on my team than you're going to get right here. What I would say to you is why don't you kick that back and let us debate it internally, and what we won't debate is the answer, but what we'll tell you is the challenges with 20, 22, 26, 28, 30 feet, so that P&Z is armed with a little better information from which to make a decision.
Did you guys already do this, Debbie?
We had the same discussion that we're having here. We wanted to slow down that traffic. David made the recommendations, and we discussed it, and it came away with the 26.
With 26.
This is residential,
Yeah,
right?
residential.
So
Yeah,
what about
definitely.
lots narrower than 40 feet? Still the same, because we talked about before where like you couldn't have on-street parking on that.
Remember, because lots less than 40, you're going to have the parking, most of it in the rear. Only people that are going to be in the front would be guest parking.
One of the things that we are understanding better is ways to manage the speed of the traffic with the width of the road. And so, for instance, it's how you stripe the intersection. So you narrow the intersection down with striping, but yet if the fire truck needs to swing, they cross the lines. Yeah. Councilmember Ennis is concerned about speed on Pecan Street. So one of the things we're going to do is buy some chalk so that we can stripe with chalk. And what we can do is we can go in and do some pilot programs. And if it works, then we can go out with real paint and solve the problem by putting in a bike lane, by striping it for parking, striping it to narrow down. So the key is to get a standard that works, and then if the speed's too much of an issue, then we certainly want to promote parking or things that help with the speed, narrow it down, but we can control that without creating, we can fix that without trading one problem for another. Right. So the key is the fire truck has to make the turn, the fire truck has to get down the street, but we can fix it to the mayor's point where if I've got wide open pavement, I don't look at the sign. I'm gonna figure out my speed. And I can assure you it's more than the speed limit. So when you narrow it down with striping and I feel like I'm tight, then I will slow down. So all of that to tell you is if we can get a standard, much like we are going to do with Councilmember Ennis's neighborhood, we're going to go in with chalk and we're going to stripe it and see if we can change the speed limit. So we've done the traffic counts. We know what the speed is today. And then we'll go in and either stripe for parking or stripe for bike lane, whatever the case may be, and then we'll leave it out there for a period of time and we'll check the speed, and if it works, then we can paint them permanently. So all of that to tell you, we can achieve your objective without having to fix the width of the street if we get the width of the street right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so if you guys are comfortable with 26, it sounds like y'all had a discussion as well, then Councilmember Nelson, do you have any? Yeah,
the emergency vehicle aspect somewhat concerns me. A fire truck is going to be anywhere, a bumper width is going to be anywhere 96 to 104 inches wide. You have a dually parked on each side of the street. Will there be room for that emergency vehicle?
So the way that we will manage the parking on the street, because that issue will come at you because the neighbor across the street doesn't like the neighbor across the street parking in front of their house. So it's going to come to us because we're mediating a specific civil issue. And so my litmus test is always the fire truck. Go get the fire truck, drive it down the street. If he can get between the two dualies, I don't have a problem. If he can't get between the two dualies, now I have a public health life safety issue. And we will deal with that with Chief Altgeld and his team. And so sometimes it's, in a former town, we had somebody park their RV out on the road, and it irritated the neighbor. And they would park, and so the comment I made is just go take the fire truck. Well, we couldn't take the fire truck, so guess who didn't get to park on the road? You can't park your RV on the road. Well, he came in my office and he was irritated, and when I said that, it was like, oh, well, if my house catches on fire, I want the fire truck to come. So that keeps us where we're not mediating and nitpicking, but at the end of the day, everybody on that street expects the fire truck to come when called. And so we'll manage that from life safety, not because we don't want the street width to be a certain way or whatever. So the litmus test is real easy. If the fire truck can get down the street, you get to stay. If it doesn't, you get to move.
Whenever we were putting any kind of vendors on Main Street, it was had to have an 11-foot clearance for the fire trucks and the emergency vehicles. 11 feet is what we had to have.
We're changing the pavement design of the streets, so the actual pavement thickness. Your current ordinance allows a street with only 1.5 inches of asphalt on top of 8 or 9 inches of base material, and that doesn't last very long because it doesn't have that much wearing surface. So we're going to a more standard 5 inches of concrete or 6 inches of asphalt over 6 inches of stabilized subgrade, which is a fairly common street section. We are allowing ribbon curbs. Everybody wants to recreate downtown, so we want to have the idea of having grass-lined swales or bar ditches, and with that you need to have a ribbon curb. So we would pour a 6 to 10 inch concrete curb, pour asphalt in between, but then the water can flow off into the swale on either side of the road. We are adding provisions for wheelchair ramps just to keep things up. So when a developer builds his subdivision, he accommodates ADA requirements. And the last one We, rather than just outright prohibit them, we are allowing roundabouts on a limited case-by-case basis. It's for low volume intersections and with very low truck traffic. We have some pretty substantial design references in there to use that, but it's kind of like the experiment with the lane widths. You know, maybe we need to experiment a little with roundabouts other than just simply say no. But I know Mayor and the city manager have some opinions on that. But you're not going to say them tonight. We are limiting dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs. There's nothing wrong with cul-de-sacs, but when it becomes wrong is when they become very long, and there's a lot of houses and then you lose the connectivity going from street to street. So we'll allow cul-de-sacs, but they can be no longer than 200 feet in length and no more than 20 houses, and that's a lot of houses to fit on 200 feet, but basically 10 houses on a side if you were creative.
And you guys are all, I think that makes perfect sense.
Private streets. Your current ordinance does not allow private streets or gated communities, but the P&Z wanted to have a provision where they could be considered on a case-by-case basis. And so we provided some information about, when you could use it, what kinds of design, and we're primarily interested in the entry design to make sure emergency vehicles could get in and out, etc. So this is in there. Whether you use it a lot, I don't know. We'll just have to see. It does require approval of the gate and amenity plan of the plantings and stuff. Requires that the streets meet our standards. Too often people want to do private streets so they can cut corners and then give it back to the city to take care of when they start falling apart. So they'll have to be designed to our standards. It requires a mandatory HOA to establish a street maintenance fund so that there's money collected to take care of the streets, and it includes a provision for how do we turn those into public streets. There's also a reverse, how could you turn an existing public street into a private street? That rarely comes up, but it does come up from time to time. And then because we're requiring alleys, we have some design standards for alleys.
Dave, real quick, on the private streets going into public streets, is there some sort of language in there relative to the connectivity between the private and the public to ensure that the appropriate responsibilities are outlined and clear?
Well, this is talking about taking a private street and then turning it into a public street. And so you have to get the permission from all the people that front onto that street. Do they want to make it a public street?
I think you're missing my clue. The connectivity between where the public street ends and the private road.
Right, and that's that gate and amenity plan to show how that connects together. But one of the problems with, there's lots of problems with gated communities. You can talk about, social equity, but one of the big problems is connectivity. So for example, we've adopted a thoroughfare plan that shows a thoroughfare going through the colony. Well, the colony is all private streets, so you can't get through there. So we're having to work around that issue. Whether we approve a private gated community or not, we'll just have to see, but now we will have that option available for us.
And just to further complicate this for things beyond that, private streets, now we get to address whether or not the garbage truck goes in and out. You've got code enforcement challenges from access. It's in theory it sounds great, but everybody that lives there expects us to take care of them the way they would if they weren't in a gated community. So this is one of those. It's great it's here, but we need to be very thoughtful and deliberative when we allow it, because you're trading one set of problems for another.
Which is, I think you guys are really smart to do it case by case, because I can think of maybe it's tiny homes, and maybe there's a reason that those folks, things change and there could be reasons. So I think you're smart to have thought about it, but for it to be on a case-by-case basis.
I'll be honest, I kind of push for this a little bit heavy, only for the idea that if you have land and there's a need or a desire for something like that, I thought it was inappropriate to just say no. Not only that, at some point when we annex the colony, or depending on where we work, we're going to end up with gated communities inside of our city limits anyway. And so if there's a need and there's people want it, there should be a provision to do so, which I think we came up with a good way to do that.
We've clarified some of the requirements on driveways, including the number and spacing of driveways. You know, driveways on a local street is not a problem. When you have a lot of driveways on a collector or thoroughfare, congestion, accident conflict points, all those kinds of things. So we want to kind of minimize those where we can, particularly location and proximity to intersections. We are allowing, this is for driveways, our current standard requires that it be asphalt or concrete. And so we're allowing some alternate types of city-approved all-weather dust-free surfaces, which could be pavers. We could have the 2 tracks. You know, back in the 40s, your driveway was just 2-foot strips of concrete that went up to the garage. We could allow that. Again, it'll be considered by the city engineer.
What's required in the right-of-way?
The right-of-way would be a standard drive approach.
Okay, because where I have problems is if it's, because city approved all weather, isn't that pea gravel?
Could be.
So when pea gravel comes all the way out to the city street and then it rains,
right.
So that's why I want to make, so you've got the apron of it still has to be concrete.
It'll still be a concrete drive approach there.
Okay.
And then part of the design approval would be, how do we keep it in the driveway instead of going out? Likewise, how do we keep it from becoming dusty and those kinds of things? Street naming and sign requirements we had in 2 different sections, and they kind of conflicted with each other. And in addition to that, they didn't match what we were actually doing in practice. So we have changed that. So we have changed it to reflect what's actually happening. We have a requirement for sidewalks, and they're 5-foot sidewalks. Wider is better for walkability. You can walk next to each other. You know, for some reason back in the 50s and 60s, we had real narrow sidewalks that meant we had to all walk single file. This would make it much more conducive to walking. But we're also requiring it in ETJ, and the county is pushing back on that. I've got a slide in here of some of their initial responses, but we'll have to start thinking about what we're going to require in the ETJ, because if we annex those areas, we have some obligation to eventually provide them. You don't have to do it right away, but there is you do need to think about that.
Mayor and council and the planning and zoning commissioners, part of the challenge with not holding the county to our standards is it prevents us from ever wanting to annex it. We can't take care of what we have, so why would we annex something that doesn't even meet our standard to have to take care of? There's a reason you have a statutory ETJ. There's a reason the city is given development authority that the county doesn't possess, and it is for this reason. Part of the challenge is if we're going to create a standard and a value that says walkability is important, then we can't allow development to not have sidewalks, because when we annex it, it's going to be too expensive to put them in. So I appreciate the county's in a position they don't want to have to take care of them. But I also know, having been out with Commissioner Hamner, they are building some subdivisions that don't meet our standard just outside of our statutory ETJ, and they have rock for streets. People bought the lot with a rock street, built the house with a rock street, and now are demanding the county to pave it. And so no good deed goes unpunished. And so this is an area that I think that we need to establish our values and be committed to our values, because if we don't, we're going to put future generations, when it comes time to annex, having standards that don't exist, and leaving future taxpayers to then have to bear the burden of putting it in when it should have been an option to begin with.
Okay, except I have a somewhat contrary view on that, and that is, are they required in the ETJ to build to our street standards?
Under this, yes.
And do our street standards allow for bar ditches in the rural areas?
Yes.
So requiring 5-foot sidewalks on...
But there's an exception.
We also allow in the rural area to build streets with paved shoulders too. And in fact, one of the options for providing sidewalks is to have the paved shoulder, allow people to walk on that. If you have the paved shoulder, you don't need to have a sidewalk next to it, you can just walk. But we don't want to have a situation where you have a 20-foot strip of asphalt and a bar ditch and there's no place to walk. We also have the option to have a trail system that meets the intent of a sidewalk system.
Yeah,
so
the trail. And my only point is, if it's in the ETJ, they may have large lots, and the walkability expectation is not the same as downtown.
Don't disagree. We just provide walkability, whether it's a trail, whether it is the road with shoulders, because what inevitably happens is if you don't and we annex it, the first thing I'm going to get is a call from a parent. You're making my child walk down the middle of the road and I can't get to school. And so I think what Dave is saying, you got to provide walkability, and we're going to give you a lot of options. What we're not going to do is not let you provide walkability.
Okay, and that's great, and I appreciate that this is a summary, but when I read that, it makes me think I have no choice but 5-foot sidewalks on both sides of any subdivision in the ETJ. So thank you that there are options.
One of the issues about building sidewalks is when a developer builds, he doesn't want to build the sidewalks up front because the home builders are going to end up driving over them and tearing them all up. So we have a provision where you could defer the sidewalk construction to the home building, to the home builder. So when the home builder builds his driveway, he's probably going to pour the sidewalk at the same time. Unfortunately, you don't sell and build all the lots right at once. So there comes a point where you end up with gaps. And so we have a provision that you would put up a bond for 20% so that at the end of 4 years, if there are gaps, there's money available to fill in those gaps. The bond's there simply as insurance. We're going to make the developer do it, but if he's gone and we need the money, we have some way to do that.
David, did I miss anything? We've talked about walkability and moving around in the community. I haven't seen anything about bike lanes anywhere. Did I miss those?
We have not specified bike lanes. We do have a mention about complete streets. And you could infer from that, but in our subdivision ordinance, we have not gotten to the detail of bike lanes.
At a 5-foot width, that's generally a bike and a walking. That's one of the reasons that you do 5 feet.
And some bicyclists like to ride in the street lane. I mean, they don't want to have a separate.
Do we allow bicycles on sidewalks in city ordinance? Because the transportation code makes those a vehicle, I believe. Yeah. Meaning they have to be in the street.
Yeah, unless you're a kid, most bicyclists are going to have to be out in the street.
And the reason for that is my husband is a cyclist, and with a little bitty tire and the bike lane, all of the debris from the street goes in the bike lane, or there's things that they can't maneuver around, so they would prefer to ride in the street for that reason. So part of the challenge with the bike lane is not every neighborhood works. So we're excited with the chalk concept that we can do the complete street where it makes sense, and make sure we're not building freeways in the middle of town when they don't, which is the TxDOT standard. If we adopted it, then we really have ruined the fabric of Bastrop.
Parking lots, we're also allowing some alternative pavement. It doesn't always have to be concrete or asphalt. There might be some other ways that you could address an all-weather, dust-free surface and accomplish your needs on a case to be approved on a case-by-case basis. Biggest issue again being how do we keep it in the parking lot and not in the street. We're adding provisions for street trees so that when a developer builds his subdivision, he'd be required to plant a row of trees on either side of the street to provide some canopy cover. It also helps in some of the traffic calming because that helps the feeling that you're being enclosed in. When you redo your zoning ordinance, it may be that you switch that to requiring 1 tree in a front yard, which is a fairly common standard, in lieu of having a street tree. But in either way, you get some tree canopy in the front yard. And there'd be provisions for separations from utilities, intersections, street lights, and where you would require a root barrier system. We specify 13 species that would be allowed for street trees, and a requirement that you alternate species from block to block so that we don't end up with an entire town full of Dutch elm and wonder why everything gets sick. But the maintenance of that would then fall on the homeowner, just like the maintenance of the grass in front of their house in the right of way is the responsibility of the homeowner.
Linda, in your experience, have you seen issues with homeowners not wanting to take care of the street trees and taking them to the cities?
Yes, sir, and if they're not planted well, what they end up doing is tearing up the sidewalk, and it becomes a trip hazard, and it's a real deal. Public Works directors notoriously hate them because it ends up with their tearing up their infrastructure, but they're hugely important for walkability, hugely important for shade, their protection, and it gives the person at that street level a different perspective. So part of the challenge that we're going to have to do is make sure that they're planted right and they're the right kind of tree, and you can manage how they're planted to minimize tearing up the sidewalk, infiltrating the sidewalk. I mean the infrastructure. The key when they're planted is really to put them in our right of way, so it's not an issue where the homeowner has to tend to them. Because with time, two things happen. One, you don't tend to it, or BP&L comes through and that will be Mr. Irvin's comment. He trims them. I take exception to trimming. So the key is to make sure that they grow in a way that we're not trading one problem for another, and we've got these fabulous trees with these great canopies, and now they're butchered. So all of that to tell you, this is another situation. There's no perfect answer, so common sense has to apply. We need to make sure that we're not just checking the box, but we're looking at the intent and we're making smart choices about what's there. The value here is we're going to have trees along the street, and we've got to figure out where it makes sense to do that, and if not, what do you put in its place so the walkability factor is still met, and as a pedestrian, you still feel safe to walk your children and your dog down the street, and there's a myriad of ways that we can do that. So this is a wonderful thing to say we want to have, but then we need to be smart about not creating conflicts that don't work.
To make you feel better about the tree trimming, this applies in new subdivisions, and we require underground utilities. Lots and blocks, each lot must front on a public street or approved public easement. That's a general requirement now, but we're actually spelling it out. And we actually have some areas in town that were not properly platted that have ended up with lots with no street frontage. And now they are landlocked, and we're trying to work through the issues of how do we get access to a public street, who builds it, how there's not room for a standard street through there, so we're having to cut some corners. Flag lots are prohibited, and for those of you that are not familiar with flag lots, a flag lot is a lot like these 10 and 20 acre tracts with a little 20-foot strip that goes down to the street. You know, you can get real creative with a way to divide up a big piece of property without putting in the street that should have been put there to begin with to provide the circulation. So we're basically prohibiting any lot that is narrower than the standard width required in the zoning, and typically it can't be narrower than the property as a whole. How we measure the lot widths at the building line, this is also covered in the zoning, but we want to make sure that we don't end up with what are essentially flag lots with real narrow frontages that go back to a bigger lot in the back. This commonly happens around cul-de-sacs, because with a pie-shaped lot, you can get fairly narrow. And the reason for the 33-foot wide at the right-of-way is we require that the lot width be measured at the building line. Well, people in cul-de-sac will say, well, we'll just push the building line further and further back, and we can get narrower and narrower as we get to the front. So we want to have some minimums. Creeks and streams. We're requiring that no more than 50% of the lots can back up to the creek. We want to make sure that at least half of the lots face the creek. You know, we have a bad habit of turning our backs to creeks, and then they tend to become problems. The creeks and streams are an asset, and we ought to be building on that, celebrating on that, so we're requiring that at least half of the houses face the river or the creek. Now, developers will push back on that because they want to have a double loaded street to pay for that street. Now they're only going to have a single loaded street. They're going to have half as many houses paying for that section of the street.
And what
Wait. So there's a 2-acre lot. It has a current street in front of it, and it backs up to Piney Creek. If I make it 2 lots, how do I meet that?
This is not really addressing little 1 or 2 lot subdivisions, but if I have 40 acres and I'm laying out a bunch of small lots, I don't want to have a situation where I've lined up the backs of all the houses.
Yeah, and I'm perfectly
Right.
fine with that. But so is there an exception because I've just described to you something that really could happen.
Well, because there's no way to get a street on the other side of that house.
So then you would, staff-wise, administratively waive that requirement because it just doesn't make any sense?
Yeah, right.
Mayor and council and planning and zoning commissioners, the development community is going to push back on this. And I hope y'all stand very strong because statistically, if we're interested in financially sustainable communities, houses that are within a short distance of parkland are worth 20 to 25% more long-term because parkland and open space is valuable. That would be the first thing. The second thing is we've got some subdivisions in town that inevitably are going to turn their back to the creek, and guess what they want to designate to us as parkland? That would be behind the houses. As a female, I'm not going back there. I'm not going to walk the trail. That's not an amenity. I'm not going to take, I'm just not going to go back there. So it becomes a code enforcement challenge for something we then have to deal with that's not an amenity. And so by recognizing that the creeks are really amenities and fronting that, it's been my experience in subdivisions that are designed for walkable and sustainability, those lots are a premium. They're going to sell first. People are going to want them. So if it's a planned development and it's a choice we make, that's one thing. But just to make it easy for them to not do it, I think long term it impacts the way the subdivision ages. And one of the challenges that we have in our work plan, and we've talked about this, is the Colorado River needs to become an amenity to the city. And so we have a half-mile stretch of trail along the river that everybody loves. They want to walk and they want more of it. Well, the only way you get more of it is to cause it to be public space so people can enjoy it and not turn their backs to it where I now feel unsafe doing it. So when Dave goes out in the public and debates this with the development community, this is going to be top 1, 2, or 3 things that are going to come back and say, we don't like it, you're killing development. And my comment to that is, no, you're not. We're going to make you do it right, and you're going to long-term reap real benefits because they're going to be premium lots that front it.
Same thing with public parks. You don't want to turn your back to the park and then you equally feel unsafe because there are no eyes on the park to... floodplains, drainage.
Dave, real quick.
Sure.
How does that, because we are extending these requirements or conditions into the ETJ, how does that affect golf courses?
Well, the question then is the golf course a public park or not?
Yes.
And most of the time it's not. Most of the time a golf course is a private country club.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. We've had a lot of discussion about what to do about flooding and about, that the 100-year is not good enough because we had, how many 500-year floods in recent years. So what we came up with is to have the developer put on the plat the extent of the 500-year flood in addition to the 100-year flood. And also, we have a requirement of a 2 foot of freeboard. So, I have a little drawing here. There's the 100-year flood level. So 1% per year, the flood's going to be that high. The edge of that is the edge of the 100-year floodplain. Now, on a 0.2% chance each year, or once every 500 years, it's going to get outside of that and on further up. We have a requirement that if you build a house, FEMA would allow you to build a house at or above the 100-year flood level. So you could build your house under FEMA rules at that level. FEMA also allows you to fill in what they call the floodway fringe. The floodway fringe is defined as the area that you could constrain the 100-year flood and have no more than a 1-foot rise in base flood elevation. Well, if you could build your house at that level and FEMA would allow you to raise the flood by 1 foot, you've ended up with a foot of water in your house under FEMA rules. So most cities, including Bastrop, we've adopted a 2-foot freeboard requirement. So any new house that's built has to be 2 foot above that 100-year flood level. But it ends at the 100-year floodplain. So what we're going to do is we're going to require that that 2-foot freeboard above the 100-year flood be extended out into the 500-year flood level. It gives you an extra level of protection for the 500-year flood. It doesn't necessarily protect for the 500-year flood, but it's 2 foot higher than what would have been there if you didn't do anything. And a number of other cities have been doing that, including Houston and Harris County have just adopted that standard.
So the cross section is the freeboard.
Yeah, this is the flood level. That there is the freeboard, 2 foot above.
It's like if your boat's in the water and you can see that much of the boat, it's hard to boat out of the water.
Okay.
This is not really a good drawing for that particular answer, but
Dave, can you can achieve that via foundation or backfill, right?
Yes.
Either one is depending on how they want to do it.
And in most cases, most people will fill in the 100-year and then build their house. And there's typically a 6-inch. If it's slab on grade, it's 6 inches. If it's spear on beam, it'll be a foot or more.
But there's the option for them to do it either way.
And do you have the compaction standards and stuff you would be referencing City of Austin standards?
Right.
Is that an example?
It would typically it's a 95% compaction. Typically that would be specified in your flood damage ordinance.
So just when he said that it's the option of fill or concrete, I just want to make sure that we've got the right, because what you can do is just dump a bunch of dirt and then go, okay, well I filled and now I'm going to build a house, and then you have housing problems. So I just want to make sure we're including the specifications for that.
And those other ordinances that I have listed on the front of page 1, the flood damage ordinance is one of those that we need to kind of tweak to get that.
So you can. I mean, I understand the principle of this. I thought you were saying that you had to be 2 feet above, but you had to be out in the 500-year floodplain at that 2 feet. What you're saying is you can infill the 100-year floodplain with dirt to get above that, or at least the fringe of it.
FEMA allows in the floodway fringe that you could raise the flood level as long as the surface water doesn't go up more than 1 foot. So your fill would be 2 foot. Now, if you're out in the 500-year flood and you are still subject to that 2 foot above BFE elevation, you could still raise it up there.
I don't think that answers his question. So let me see if I understand your question. Right now, we only require a 2-foot freeboard requirement in the 100-year floodplain. What this is going to do is require a 2-foot freeboard anywhere in this town that's in the 500-year floodplain.
But you can, I guess the point is that we fill in the 100-year floodplain, we just increase the size of the 100-year floodplain. So
right.
The water's got to go somewhere.
That's right.
And so a major development that comes in and just backfills a lot of the 100-year floodplain, where we just flooded the neighbors, upstream or across the river.
Yeah, part of doing development of floodplain is that we have a responsibility to make sure that we're not causing flooding on other people's property. Or are we raising the level on other people's property? That's all part of the floodplain permit process. But I did want to clarify, it's not necessarily 2 foot above the ground. It's 2 foot above the 100-year flood level. you're out in the 500 year, it's going to feather out as you get further up the bank.
I just thought when you were originally saying it that you had to be above 2 feet above it, but you couldn't be in the 100 year. You had to be out the 500 year above that. Above that 100 year.
No, we would still allow in the floodway fringe, but we're providing extra protection in the 500 year flood that we're not providing now.
So, just to put this into perspective, Council, one of the things that we have in our work plan that y'all are working on as a result of the half drainage study is one of the ways that you manage drainage is through regulatory requirements. And so there's two important changes in this subdivision ordinance that's going to help you manage drainage through regulatory processes. And one is expecting the developer to turn it in sooner rather than later, and this change right here. So every development that gets built with these standards is already improving the drainage in the community. And that's part of the way that we'll fix drainage. It won't just be with capital improvement and going in and widening ditches or widening culverts. It's making sure that future development doesn't do exactly what the doctor said, and that is create downstream problems because we didn't know what that looked like.
Actually, I think there's probably a third feature that would help drainage. That's higher drainage standards that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
I also want to clarify that there is a difference between floodway fringe and the floodway, because FEMA's not going to let you.
You can't do anything in the floodway without getting permission from FEMA in Washington. And so that's very difficult to do, but they will allow you to build.
Because I think what Matt was saying is, so you're going to let them build these castles all through it, and now they're going to flood everybody around them. So that's not what we're talking about.
Now, I will tell you that there are some cities that actually just prohibit anything in the 100-year floodplain, but that takes up a lot of land area, and so you're going to have landowners upset about that they have no way to be able to develop. We require design for 4 different storm events, which is actually fewer than what you currently require, but I think there's some redundancy in what's currently required. Even though it's not required under current state and federal law, we are adding a water quality storm, which is basically the first 1.5 inches of rain that happens. What happens is all that oil and grit that collects on the street, that first inch of rain washes all that stuff into the creek, and the quality of that is about the same as raw sewage in terms of suspended solids and oxygen demand. So we want to be able to try to control for that. Bastrop's currently too small to be required to do that, but eventually we're going to have to do it anyway. And besides, it's the right thing to do from an environmental standpoint. We're requiring a 2-year, 24-hour storm, and that's mainly for stream bank protection. A 2-year storm is about bank full, so that's where most of the erosion occurs when the stream comes up and down, softens the bank, and it falls in. We have a conveyance storm, which is a 25-year storm, and a flood storm, which is a 100-year storm. As I mentioned, there's a requirement to look at drainage earlier in the process so we can avoid some problems where we can. And we are indirectly adopting the ISWIM technical manual. ISWIM stands for Integrated Stormwater Management. It's not the Austin standard, but it's a parallel standard that's been adopted in North Central Texas, though it's similar to standards that have been adopted in Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee, and basically just integrates a standard stormwater design along with water quality design to make sure that we can meet state and federal requirements. We've expanded and limited the hydrologic methods that you could use to calculate drainage. There's an over-reliance here on the rational method, which is a quick and dirty, Q equals CIA. But when you get to a large watershed, you tend to get wrong results. And then you can abuse the factors and can get some wrong results. So we're limiting the rational method to 100 acres at the most and using more sophisticated methods for larger developments. We are updating the intensity, duration, and frequency coefficients used to calculate rainfall. The current standards are close to 20 years old. Newer data is available that shows that actually it rains more on a frequency basis than it used to back then. And so we're adding that in. So we're actually designing for bigger storms than what we used to design for. Just like the low impact development, where we're giving some options for 2 out of the 20, even though we're not requiring water quality control per se, we're asking developers to show that they're trying to do at least one of the water quality treatment, not measuring what the quality of the discharge is or requiring detention ponds everywhere, but kind of look at how you could control water quality. And roadside swales turned out to be a good water quality treatment method. We're requiring downstream assessments. So your development is going to increase runoff. We want to figure out what the effect is downstream. And it may be that we can show using that you don't need to have detention. And particularly, particularly if you're next to the Colorado River, it doesn't make any sense to have detention because you're just going to go into the river anyway. You also want to make sure that you don't time the ponds so that they each lower the peak, but they all come back together in a bigger peak. Looks at volume and velocities downstream. There are options for streamback protection if velocities get too high. There's 3 or 4 methods you can approach. Options for flood mitigation. We've got a lot more detailed design standards for street drainage, storm sewers, bridges, culverts, etc. And in a detention pond, we got to make sure that we have multi-stage outlets so that we're designing the discharge to look not only at the 100-year storm, but the 25-year storm and the 2-year storm, because you don't want to have an outlet for a 100-year storm. Well, that 50-year storm just goes right through it, and there's not much attenuation in the peak.
Did we, if I recall, did we place any incentives to do, and I'm going to mess up which one's which one is the one that's between detention and retention that are used multi-purpose?
Well, typically retention is where there's permanent water.
Right. So did we talk about putting incentives in for developers to do detention ponds where we can have open space parks and stuff, and then when it rains, they fill with water, and then when it goes away, it dries out? I thought we talked about that.
We talked about that. I don't know that we have any specific incentives per se.
That's kind of one of the ones I was in. For Hunter's Crossing, you've got multiple purpose areas. When it's not flooded, you've got them for this versus the Burleson Crossing, which has a great big concrete hole in the ground.
Okay.
I recall, I thought, a conversation we had where we wanted to incentivize developers to do that so that we can have, it's just not water, but it could be a park or whatever else, fields, and then it goes away and comes back. And
I remember the discussion, but I'm not sure what we ended up, if anything, with incentives.
I would like to see a push towards that. I think it's less, we have less days of rain than we have more days of rain in this area, so we'd have more use of it as a park or something, basketball courts, playground, whatever it would be.
There's a lot of cities that use detention ponds that go dry as soccer fields and stuff like that.
Right.
But it does take a little bit of maintenance too.
Yeah,
one of the things that we're also looking at that would happen after this is exactly what you're talking about, Patrick, but in a more passive way, that you build drainage channels instead of these big honking ponds, and then you build your linear trails around them and you integrate them through a development, and then you've got a park-like setting. They're not code enforcement nightmares. They're public space that tend to get better maintained than the big detention pond that they let grow up with stuff. In some instances, the big detention ponds are important, and the incentive would be creating a regional detention pond that you buy into, so we don't have them everywhere, and then programming them exactly like you're talking about, so that we're adding parkland and programming that makes sense and it has a dual purpose. And we're having some internal conversations about that, but we got to get these standards fixed so we can get to those standards.
Okay. I didn't hear you say anything about it, and I remember it was an important conversation we had. So.
And one of the incentives is you can get double credit. You got to provide parkland, you got to provide detention. Well, it could be the same piece of land.
I think that's what we talked about before was doing like that.
We're getting close to the end, so Jennifer, be on guard to get started. We've also added some more provisions on underground utilities, water lines and fire hydrant spacing. We had kind of limited information in our current subdivision ordinance, trying to beef that up. Wastewater systems, electric, and street lighting. I've updated the street lighting standards for LED lights now, so we're not referring to high pressure sodium or mercury vapor lamps.
Before you leave LEDs, I think LEDs are the best thing we can do. I mean, from a longevity standpoint and operation cost, they're a lot cheaper than high pressure sodiums. But I think we also need to look at what frequencies of light we're putting in there. Hunter's Crossing has the bright whites in them, and there's some studies I've been digging into on this, and a lot of cities have done this. When you fill a city with the bright whites, all of a sudden they're going, where'd my sky go? We need to look at what they're calling ambers or cool whites. These are kind of more in the direction of that yellow, the color the high pressure sodiums are at. So we've got the light we need, but we don't have that bright white light lighting up the city.
In our dark skies ordinance that we have, does it not address that?
It doesn't address the frequency or the tone of the light. It just more talks about facing downward and the intensity of the light.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can consider, I think at the time we had talked about this, I was still waiting on some information from the Institute of Illumination Engineers. I think and then it turned out it was a real expensive little tiny pamphlet that didn't say anything. So.
IEEE did a nice study about 2 years ago. I'll send you the link on it.
Okay.
IEEE International Society of Electrical Engineers.
So, next steps. Yes. I have been intentionally avoiding going out to the public until I had a chance to brief the council on this. I didn't want to get too far ahead of you all, but you know, all the P&Z meetings are on TV, and so the county has actually been following this fairly closely. In fact, I think the county planner has read it more closely than I may have, because she always asks me questions about something she's read in there. So anyway, we ended up meeting with them on April 4th to find out what some of their concerns were. And their main concerns had to do with parks and infrastructure requirements in the ETJ, because we are making a change. Just as a reminder, Bastrop's a little unique in that in addition to the standard 1 mile statutory ETJ, we've got about 125 square miles of voluntary ETJ that's coming in that goes all the way out to Travis County line. More I've thought, and we've had some internal discussions about what we want to require out in the ETJ as well. My current thinking is that maybe we require the full standards within the statutory ETJ and then leave the county stuff to what's there. And then as we annex, if we annex, then that would go out a little further. So next steps would be to plan some meetings with the developer, engineer, and surveyor community. We would invite them to come in, send them copies of the ordinance, and we'd have a discussion about the provisions in it. Meet with utility companies such as Aqua and Bluebonnet. I am committed to speak at the Board of Realtors Luncheon on June 14th. I might want to talk about that. And then, well, when we get to the end, I'll explain why. And then P&Z wants to have a general open public meeting prior to their next formal P&Z meeting.
So real quick, so I'm huge on public education on stuff like this, and I think this is super important to treat just like we did the comp plan. Absolutely. Only because this is a ministerial process and people understand that if it meets the requirements, there's nothing we can do about it. The city can't say no, and I think the public needs to understand that and understand that if you have a beef, bring it now, because once it's changed, it would be very difficult to go back and amend this over and over and over again for every situation.
Oh, Patrick, that sounds so much easier than it actually is. It absolutely needs to happen. The problem is you can't make them come. So I would encourage you to, instead of just having like an open general public come visit with us, that maybe you guys kind of talk about maybe you guys have a conversation and go through some highlights or whatever, so that there can be some streaming or some video that you're exactly right. But the fact of the matter is, and Linda talks about it, until it's their ox gored in the ditch, the truth of the matter is, he wasn't real much interested in whether it was a legal lot or not till he figured he might not have one. Right? And so if somebody's not planning on developing, if they don't care until they care, and then they.
So and it sounds crass.
So my point is, we have everybody on council. We have 9 P&Z people. So we that's why you guys are strategically. It's not an accident that Matt's been through both commercial and residential development lately. That's one of the reasons I wanted him on this P&Z. You guys are from different cross sections, whether it's how long you've lived, the people that you hang out with, where you live, the subdivisions that you. So I'm really begging you to get the word out so that when the meeting happens, we really do have the impact. The reason the comp plan worked was because 1,500 people participated, and it's unfortunate that one general public meeting's probably not going to get 1,500 people.
Well,
so we just got to think of some other ways to do that.
My thought, and I realize it's more difficult to implement, but is a public education thing that, a couple different events, not just one public meeting, come and show up. And I said it a few months ago, and it came out kind of crass, but, people come out and to complain about something when they don't like it, like you said. And so ample opportunity to say we don't like this now versus later, because later there's nothing we can do about it. Kind of like when when the apartment complex went up in front of 100 Cross, there's nothing we could do about it. Nobody could change that. It's going to happen, and nobody was aware of it.
Don't disagree at all. And I'm sure that Linda will have a conversation with Sarah about maybe Dave, Colin tapes Dave going through a few of the slides, and that video's available or whatever. But we're all on the same page. Yes, let's get the information out. But I would just really encourage you guys that live in different parts of the town to talk to people and make sure we cover that cross section. You're 1,000% right.
One of the suggestions that I would make is that you find 4 or 5 people in your life you suspect wouldn't like this, and go talk to them. And then they will give you information as to, is it a lack of education, or is there a real reason why they don't like it? If they got a real reason and we haven't thought about it, then you're spot on. Let's take care of it before we adopt it. But if you just don't like it in general, okay. That's just one of those things that, as the mayor says, you too can run to sit on council so you could vote. But if there is a legitimate reason that is a problem and we hadn't thought about it, we're really working to solve the problems, not trade one for another. So there's always people in our life that we know will argue something or bring a different perspective. Please shop that with them, because that's the feedback we need. Is if it's really not going to work, let's figure that out for you.
I would also encourage, because it's just the news source, social media, for everyone to please, Nextdoor, Facebook, whatever sources, because it's amazing how fast people respond to that.
I have spent a couple hours on Nextdoor for people that really care about it.
David, in your meetings that you're going to schedule with the developers, engineers, surveyors, utilities companies, if possible, I'd like to attend them. I'd like to hear their perspectives.
Realistically, we'll probably schedule most of those meetings during the day, because that's when they work, but I will send invitations to both the council and the P&Z that you're welcome to come, because I'd like for you to hear what they have to say instead of me conveying what they said to you.
Yeah, hear their points, their perspectives on what they're doing.
If they're really concerned about it, you'll hear about it on June 28th.
Yeah, so the plan would be, the current would be to take it to P&Z the end of June. End of May is almost already here. We've got a full agenda anyway. And then we would go to council in July. That, again, may be optimistic. I thought we'd be done with this in January. So
will we be accepting written remarks?
Oh, yes.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah, email. Is that what you mean? Somebody wants to submit something by email or handwritten?
Actually, no, handwritten, anonymously.
Let's put it this way. We will consider all comments.
Absolutely.
May not respond to all of them. And certainly can't respond to one that's anonymous. but we will at least consider it because they may have a valid point.
So really quickly about the timeline. So we are hearing public comments and voting on it the same night on the 28th?
No.
So we don't really...
No, we're talking about having a public meeting of some format prior to your June 28th meeting.
So we'll have a chance to address them and put
Right.
them in the code before we as P&Z actually
Basically,
recommend
you would have had all of those meetings, made some changes to it, and then you'll have a public hearing on the changes that you've made, and then decide whether you need to go back to the drawing board on a couple spots or if you're ready to recommend. That's how I'm understanding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You guys have done an unbelievably fantastic job. Just round of applause for y'all.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
The sense of urgency that is pushing this is we had 4 developers come in last week, and if they get in before these are adopted, we're going to have some substantial development. So we will work to position it, but I would ask if you can't get it done on the 28th, would you consider a special meeting? Because we thought we had a little more time than we've done, and literally in the last week we've retooled a whole lot of things, because if the schedules they are suggesting happen, we're fixing to get real busy.
And they've also most of them have expressed interest in a planned development. So that I don't want to alarm people unnecessarily.
No,
but it isn't super important.
But what could happen is they could come in and file under straight zoning for 14 lots and then renegotiate later and claim they have a vested right.
Yeah.
There's always games to be played, so just putting that out there.
No, we'll definitely consider a meeting, a special meeting. I don't think anybody would offer that. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't give a round of applause to Dave Gaddis and to Jennifer Bills and the entire staff. Because although we spent lots of hours on it, my God, he wrote it.
Yeah.
Jennifer wrote it. So,
all righty,
thank you.
It's 8:57.
Well, and Mayor, that's a good segue. I made kind of an obtuse comment a second ago. I have been here since the middle of August. I have been interim. Interim is not permanent. And so today we agreed on my final day as being May 31st. So I will be there for your P&Z meeting and be for council. I will continue on in a consulting basis to finish the subdivision ordinance, and there's a couple of other projects that are in the mill. But I just wanted to say I'll see you both at your meetings, but I've enjoyed working for you all as well.
Oh my gosh, Dave, can't even imagine. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. All righty, Ms. Bills, you get an opportunity to follow that. It's 8:58, and we're on discuss the city's policy on allowing existing static billboards to convert to digital.
Yes, and hopefully this won't take 2.5 hours. So recently we've been approached by one of the billboard companies in town to see what our interest is in doing some kind of agreement on converting existing static billboards, the billboards you see that are already up in town, to digital billboards, which you may have seen throughout the area. Just to give you a little background on why I'm having to bring this to y'all, in our sign code, we regulate signs within the city limits and along certain highways within our 1 mile statutory ETJ. In our sign code, we do not allow any new billboards. There's some questions. We did talk about this at P&Z at our last meeting, some questions about that. The reason for that is to eventually phase out. These billboards will still, the ones in town will last for a long while, but to phase out some of them as they age out. Because they're not allowed in our current code, the existing ones are considered legal non-conforming structures. And as such, they're allowed to continue in their current form and function as long as they're maintained. But once they reach a level where they cannot be maintained or they want to change to something new, the code doesn't allow it at this point. To give you some examples of what we're talking about with a static billboard, you've got Here's examples of what they look like during the day and during the night. They have one picture. At night, most of them, if they are lit, some are not. They usually have the lights at the bottom shining up at the billboard. Some examples of digital billboards. They can change. TxDOT does have regulations on how often those can change, and some brightness standards. I believe they're allowed to change every 6 seconds is what TxDOT allows. During the day, they don't look a whole lot different than your static billboards. At night, they can be fairly bright, depending on where you are and what different city standards are on the brightness. What the request has been is, would we be interested in letting a company switch out a specific number of existing billboards to have one digital billboard? So they would take down a certain number of their existing billboards to allow that new digital billboard. One of the concerns as staff has looked at this is there's about at least five different sign companies in town that have billboards. Lamar, Quality Sign, Reagan. On Lamar's inventory alone, they have over 60 billboard faces in our area. That's just one company, yeah. So our best estimate, we haven't done a full sign inventory, but that there's over 100 billboard faces in our area. So depending on what that ratio of swap out is, you could end up with a significant number of digital billboards if a lot of companies choose to go this direction. So what we're looking for is feedback on what everyone thinks about digital billboards, if this is the direction we want to go. In our current sign code, we do allow LEDs on local on-site signage, so your signs for the business that's on that lot. But we only allow 25% of that sign face to be the digital part of that. And we have rules that regulate how often it can change. It can't flash, it can't strobe, it can't be too bright at night. So we would be having to change our current code if we're going to allow this kind of conversion. We would have to work with legal to figure out how that's going to work. So we wanted to get everyone's input so we could ask the right questions or see if we need to do more work or if this is not a direction anyone wants to go. Oh, there you go, sorry. So then also, yeah, so we did talk about this at the Planning and Zoning meeting last month, and P&Z had a number of different ideas. One was, would the company be interested in turning it off at night or leaving it on one image? So you wouldn't have that distraction. What would be the number that we would be comfortable with on a swap? Of course, we'd have to research the light output and brightness and how that works with our current outdoor lighting ordinance. And then one question someone asked is, could they be used for emergency messages? Is there a way we could require the companies to do that for Amber Alerts or some such message? And does the allowance of digital billboards match the long-term vision? Is that what everyone feels is in line with our current comprehensive plan? So,
your last statement on the end, I'm going to go with a no. I don't think we need to look like Las Vegas and going to digital boards. It's going to go there. We're a historic town. Historic towns aren't filled with lots of pretty lights.
So I thought...
Well, let's hear from everybody before we start trying to... Matt?
I don't really have anything great to say on it. I mean, I can see it both ways. Okay. I understand it. I would have a concern about if we did go to digital, the density with which they're placed. I mean, Lamar has 60 signs. Say we did a 5-to-1, and they ended up with 12 signs. Could they stick them all within half a mile of each other? That kind of stuff. But I think spread out. I mean, the ETJ's we got a big long area that we're in here. The downtown's very small when you pass through here. So
yeah, I think location is going to have to definitely be a discussion. Cynthia?
I went on different websites to look at the description of our town, and nowhere did I find any description that said even anything close to digital billboards in relation to Bastrop. Any adjectives that were there definitely were the opposite of digital billboards, in my opinion.
I even think allowing one obnoxious billboard to eliminate 4 is not even an option. I just don't think that's the spirit, the flavor that Bastrop wants to present, in my opinion.
Cheryl?
I don't think that we're the size. I am in agreement. We're not Vegas. We don't have tall buildings to mask the distraction. I do see them as a distraction. I think they're beautiful, honestly. I'm in awe. But even when I see them in Austin, it's very distracting. And I just don't think we have enough buildings to hide them enough to where they're too much of a distraction.
Sue?
I think that Bastrop's greatest charm is that we are a visual time warp. I mean, look at our downtown, look at our homes. No.
Pat?
I'm going to disagree with everybody. So here were my thoughts. So during the day, they don't look all that different. You can't really tell the difference. They're nice and bright and vibrant, and that's fine. The only concern during the day would be the frequency of changing an ad. A text dot 6 seconds. We could certainly change an ordinance to extend that every minute or minute and a half, 2 minutes, whatever. To, the concern with Vegas, that Vegas look is the flashiness, right? So if something changes every minute, 2 minutes, you get rid of some of that during the day. The top idea was something that I thought of was that at night, at dusk or whenever, whatever it happens, the image goes to one solid image and the sign dims to a acceptable level where it's not bright and it's not in your face and it's not changing, which in my opinion doesn't. If I'm driving down the road and I see one billboard and it's lit up with lights, if you have a billboard that's digital, that's not changing and it's dimmed from what it is during the day, I just don't see the difference. Not only that, when we started this whole analysis, it started with, why are we prohibiting billboards in the first place? Why do we have, why are we not allowing them and we want to get rid of them? That's the whole history, correct? Is that we eventually want to try and get rid of them. So if we can come in and say, hey, you can do one billboard, one digital billboard with these qualifications, and for doing that, you need to take down 5 or 10 of your other ones at some point with spacing and with control of the flashiness, which is the concern. We get to do away with most of our billboards and still allow them to operate a business and advertise and whatnot. So I think with a digital billboard, there are ways to minimize the concern of the Vegas feature by dimming lights, by solidifying the image and changing the frequency of when the image is changed.
Debbie?
I don't know enough about digital billboards to really make an informed decision, but with Matt, I agree with placement would be the most important thing. Now, in front of Walmart and downtown, not so much. But we're talking about in the ETJ, am I correct?
Well, it could be anywhere. The request we've had is a billboard that would be right here on 71, on the north side of 71, right, actually in the form-based code area. So
we've got a lot of things I think we need to look at. Patrick, I think, makes some excellent arguments, and so does everybody else. I just don't know enough about them and how they would look. I haven't seen a digital billboard in forever. I don't want it to jeopardize our look downtown for sure, but with brightness and turning off the images, there's a lot I don't know. What would they be willing to do? What kind of compromises would they be willing to come forward with if we could get rid of a lot of the ugly billboards we've got downtown? So I don't want to say no without getting more information.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, only if we can get these guys to agree. And I like the idea about the dimness or turn them off, but will they agree to those kind of terms if we set them out there? But I really don't like the bright flashing lights. They are very distracted, and especially at night driving. And a lot of folks, like I said, I think it'll take away a lot of small town charms. And you got a lot of people in this town in particular have trouble driving at night anyway. And that's the way I feel.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yeah, I kind of agree with everybody. I think everybody has a very good point to make. The issues that I would be looking at is the size, the locale, and and reducing the number of billboards that we have in the area. If we can get some sort of reduction in the number of billboards by putting out a single digital billboard, I think it's something we really should look at. But the size and locale are extraordinarily important.
Councilmember Ennis?
The prevailing question for me is the last one, as was mentioned over on the other side of the table. Does the allowance of digital billboards match the long-term vision for Bastrop? I say a wholehearted no.
Councilmember-elect? Welcome.
Well, I'm kind of with Lyle that everybody made a big point, but one of my things, okay, if you want to give, if let's say they're going to trade out 4 for 1, but are they going to trade out 4 primary ones? Are they going to trade out 4 that are in a tree somewhere that nobody knows we even had one? You know, we want to we want to lose some of the ones that are in our eyesores if we're going to switch. But I don't think they're going to want to give you the ones that they're getting $900 a month for. They're going to want to give up the ones that are $150 and aren't lit.
Yeah, the current proposal was for ones that were fairly far out in our ETJ, so.
Or don't even light at night.
Some other things, yeah, that we're not. That's why we're getting the feedback, so we know what to go back and ask for if you want us to go back and.
You said 60 within our ETJ just from the one company. Do we have any idea how many of those are in the city limits?
I would say at least 2/3 of them.
At least 2/3 are inside city limits.
No, those are double-sided, so that's
2/3.
2/3. That's one.
You can go up to Reagan Lamar's website and they'll show you the inventory. You can see exactly where they're sitting.
My thoughts is an ordinance that creates a list or a preference. So it's 4 for 1, and those 4 have to be on 71 or 95 or whatever else. And we just go in the list. So once all the ones are all 71, great. Then we can start moving into the ETJ outside city limits. And I think there's a way to make this work and really fulfill the mission, but also, you know, keep Bastrop.
I would be more interested to change my answer if I knew that we were getting rid of billboards between the top of the hill here and the top of the hill back here. So the valley starts darkening up again rather than having you come over the hill and seeing all this flashing at you.
Well, I'd like to voice my opinion as well. So the part of it, I think these digital billboards, someone told me, are $1 million. I don't know. So it's a business, right? They're not doing it for free. And one of the long-term visions is to not look like we're old and decrepit and have unmaintained, you know, okay, well, if you guys aren't going to let me do it, then I'm just going to let them rot on the poles till somebody makes me take them down. We don't want to look dingy either. I think you guys are asking some really great questions. I have a feeling from a business standpoint, they're not going to turn them off at night. They may be able to have from a light output, you know, and to the point of if it's not brighter than one that was there. So I am in agreement with it. Really depends on the size. It depends on the brightness of the bulb, and it depends on the exchange. And I feel like this isn't something that we should be allowing them to. We hold the cards. It's our town, it's our vision, and we need to maintain control of this. And because if we have some deal breakers and they don't want to agree with those, then we're not going to have them. But I think we should be cognizant of the fact that it's 2018 and there are places that it's appropriate. People have brought up the Birdall sign that they thought the whole world was going to come to an end with the Birdall sign, and now you don't even notice the Birdall sign. You know, it's farther out. So it's just, but you also don't want to become immune to something that's so obnoxious that now you're avoiding it as well. So I'm at a very cautious yes, but need some more information. And I'm sure they know exactly, Lamar and Reagan, and they know exactly where all their billboards are. So I would ask staff to help us with how many do we have, kind of where are they, and maybe we make them provide. I'm not trying to make it be work for y'all, but it seems to me that's the kind of information that we would need to be able to have a continued conversation. City Manager.
First of all, there is an efficiency to be gained for them, because if it is a digital billboard, they can program it from anywhere. If you leave 100 signs up, they've got to physically come out here, so they are going to be run down and decrepit. So the comment that I would make is I'm not interested in them telling us anything. What I am interested in y'all telling us what you want us to counter with. So if we have 100 signs with a 6-to-1 ratio, we're now down to 16 signs. And y'all can determine where you want them placed. You can determine how bright you want them, how often they turn, and we'll take it back to them. And they can decide if the efficiency of their business is worth that. If it is, they'll agree. If they don't, then we get stuck with what we have. But the purpose of this is Jennifer came to me and she said, well, how do you feel about it? I said, it doesn't matter what I feel about it because I don't get to vote, so we need to ask. But I think before we say no, I think we need to take the journey and come up with a proposal that says, yeah, we will, but it's a non-negotiable offer, and here's what it is, take it or leave it. And if you don't want to do that, that's perfectly fine. They can stay up, and y'all can come out 100 times every month or whatever you need to change it. But I do think that we can, particularly in light of the fact we've figured out how in the next year and a half we're going to deal with the sign ordinance. What I don't want is for us to begin to fix our signs in town and we've got 100 really ugly billboards, in the city limits that we had an opportunity to fix and now we're left with it. So I hear all of the concerns, but what I think staff needs to do is to bring y'all back some points and y'all debate what you'd like to offer, and then we'll just take it to them. And it's either they'll approve it or they won't. If they don't, nothing gained, nothing lost.
One thing that I would like to know is, do we have... if they become in ill repair, if they are real faded, do we have any control over that now?
We do. If the signs fall into disrepair, we can compel them to improve them or take them down.
How is that defined? What's the definition of disrepair for a billboard sign?
I'd have to read the ordinance a little closer.
It's going to be skanky looking. And honestly, it is because
term, right?
that is, it's kind of the jicky thing that we get into with the stuff that eats the wastewater. It is a freedom of speech issue for the sign company, and they're making tons of money. And depending on where they are, it won't be $900 a month. It'll be more like $2,000 or $3,000 a month, depending on the traffic count.
I'll tell you that the billboard at 95 and 71 is $5,000 a month for one side.
That's right.
Do we have any control over the advertisement?
No. It is protected First Amendment free speech, and they've got enough lobbyists to guarantee that the signs stay up, along with several other things that you don't get much control over, which is why we get one shot to fix this. If it's really important, and they can calculate the money, and if it's $5,000 for one sign and they can flip it 5 times, now do the math on that. That's $25,000 a month. So it's very efficient now for them to make $25,000 a month because all they got to do is program it, and they hit the launch code. So there's some real incentive for them to be able to do exactly what Patrick's doing and meet our sign code, and us go back and negotiate, because they're going to make more money per sign, really cost effective versus to having a truck come out and put the sign up.
It seems like where we're at, I would, because y'all have absolutely nothing else to do, maybe at one of your next meetings, you guys kind of put some thought into what are your deliverables, what are your deal killers, and maybe even send that to council, and maybe staff presents that to council and says, okay, well, P&Z is kind of looking at these parameters, and then you get count, and if we do that, that would also give us an opportunity for some public input as well. And then the onus isn't on you, but we could use you guys as a sounding board to kind of start defining what the box would look like.
Would it be more efficient for us to review that and give her something back to go and negotiate with Because if we come up with something to send to you guys and sign companies are like,
What I can't have
no.
you do is negotiate something and then we're falling out of that negotiation because the general public won't accept it.
Right. Well, I guess.
And so here's the deal. Here's the difference between sitting on this side and sitting on that side. You're used to business and moving fast, and governments move slow for a reason. Right. So it's just going to have to take some time. And the truth is, they're getting their money every single month. And this really is all about that last question of, does it fit with the long-term vision? So it's the long-term vision of my town, and they're not going to rush me into a decision.
Right.
That's my 2 cents on that. So that's why let you guys put some thought into it and get some public.
I'm in agreement with the distinguished chairwoman over here. I just don't know enough about it for us to make a really good decision. I can define ugly in my terminology. I can define bright. I'm very concerned about light pollution, but I just don't know how to define that level of light. And I would like to get a little bit more educated in that aspect so we can make them clear and concise.
Yeah, they're asking us to make decisions based on a picture. I mean, it's a picture. It's not lit up. It's a picture.
Now, I'm sure all of you will be Googling. I'm confident staff will bring you back some information. But what I'm hearing is it's a reluctant yes, if anything, and it's leaning more towards no. Yeah, it's a reluctant maybe. And we want to control it, but we got to have some education about it because we also don't want to say no so fast that then we're like, oh man, you mean we could have had 3 on one side and 2 on the other and 70 of them gone?
Yeah, they need to give us some more. I would want to get more information from them.
Maybe they come to our next meeting.
Maybe they come to our next P&Z meeting.
We can do that, yes.
Let you guys work that out with staff.
And they've kind of been reluctant to give us too much so far, so.
We're reluctant to say yes.
They should reluctantly bring them.
May I make an alternate suggestion before you bring them? How about you give staff an opportunity to educate you so that when they come at you, you know what your options are? Because they're, to Jennifer's point, they're only going to do the minimum of what they think you'll take.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to go back to them with a whole lot of information because a lot of times in negotiations, the first one that speaks loses.
Yeah, I think what Ms. Humble said, 100%. We get all information. We make the requirements. If they like it, they do. Like Ms. Mayor said, if they don't, they don't.
That's right.
That's the way it is.
That's right. So we can take some time. It seems, and I think we're all in agreement, regardless of digital billboards or not, the sign ordinance needs some major work. So that'll be a topic, but I'd let staff, if they can get it by in the June meeting, fine. If they can't, fine. They're not going anywhere. They've been here a long time, but you guys have done such a great job on the subdivision ordinance that we'd like you to spend some time on digital billboards too. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
I think, Jennifer, did you get what you wanted?
I did, yes.
Can I say
Councilmember Ennis,
something?
absolutely.
I'd like to say that this has been incredibly rewarding, sitting across the table from y'all talking about issues that we both need to deal with. I really appreciate hearing what y'all have to say and your thought processes on these, because it makes it a lot easier from our end to make a decision when it's time to go there. Thanks for being here.
And I'm super proud that 5 of you I put on P&Z, and you weren't on P&Z before, and we showed up. I'm just thrilled. You guys have done exactly what I was hoping for. You've got a great background. Yeah, I'm totally patting myself on the back. You're a reflection of the community. You live in all different areas, and you have different perspective. And again, Councilmember Jones could not say enough nice things about you. Was especially impressed with the fact that everybody participates and everybody asks questions, and you guys are respectful to each other. So kudos to you. It's 9:24, and unless council objects, I'd like to call the council portion adjourned. They're adjourned.
Followed closely by P&Z. Without objection, we're adjourned also.
And Dave Gaddis, thank you.